9 o'clock. I will call this budget meeting from Lambton County Council to order, and I would ask the clerk to call the roll, please.
Thank you, Warden. Councillor Arnold. Councillor Boucher. Councillor Bradley. Councillor Broad. Councillor Bruzewitz. Councillor Case. Councillor Cook. Councillor Gilliland. Councillor Gillis. Councillor Hand. Councillor McDougall. Councillor Marriott. Councillor McCharles. Councillor McGugan. Councillor Napper. Councillor Bean. And Warden Weaver. We have a quorum. Warden.
Thank you. I would ask that we stand for a moment of silent reflection. I would ask at this time if anyone has a pecuniary interest, conflict of interest, to disclose it. Councillor Cook.
Thank you, Warden. Under grants for the request, item B for Sarnia District Community Living, I have a conflict on that.
Okay, so noted. Anyone else? Okay, thank you. Item 5, we have correspondence. There is two letters of correspondence. How does Council want to deal with those? Councillor McDougall?
I move to receive and file.
Seconded by Councillor Bruzewitz. Any questions? All in favor? That's carried. Thank you. Information reports regarding the county's asset management plan and the impact of the draft 2018 budget. I would guess a motion to receive that for information. Councillor Marriott, second by Councillor Gillis. Questions regarding that? All in favor of that? That's carried. Thank you. Finance, Facilities and Court Services Division, we have 3 reports there that require a motion. Item A is a report regarding the Treasurer's statutory report on non-cash expenses included in the 2018 budget. Councillor Case, move the recommendation. Second by Councillor Cook. Questions regarding that? All in favor? That's carried. Thank you. Item B, a report from March 7th regarding tax policy being proposed for 2018. There is a recommendation with that. Do we want to receive the report for discussion to start with, or do we want to, is someone prepared to make a motion? Or do we want to have the Treasurer?
Mr. Warden, I'm prepared to put the recommendation on the floor. Move the recommendation.
Move the recommendation, parts A through H.
Yes, for discussion.
For discussion. Councillor Gillis, you second that motion? Discussion. Councillor Arnold.
Warden Weaver, members of County Council, I'd like to propose 2 amendments to those recommendations, if I may. And the first one would be under item A. It talks about the current broad class ratios for all classes other than the multi-residential class be maintained. I would like included in there and farm. And then under item B, that the tax class ratio for the multi-residential class be reduced to 2. And I'd like to add, and the farmland be reduced to 0.226. And the reason behind that is we had that information in front of us. It looked like it balanced very well. And the 2 on the multi-res, it almost mirrors exactly what Chatham-Kent has done. And because they're our closest neighbor really to the south, And then when I look at the farm side, they're already at 0.22. And so if we match them, then we have that same equitable share as our neighbors immediately to the south. And it seems to balance in the chart that I looked at a lot simpler than anything else. And as far as the impact to the total tax rates for all municipalities, it seemed to be fair and equitable. So that was the thinking behind those two amendments that I've offered. And one of the things that I read down further, and it talked about that Lambton County was the lowest taxed farm land in the southwest or the south. And 2 points. The first is that one of the reasons why is that the value of the farmland here is the lowest of a lot of our neighbors, and that's done because of the productivity component of our farmland. It's not the same as going to Chatham-Kent or to Huron or some of these other places where they have a lot more ability to grow tender vegetables and crops such as that. There's only a few pockets in Lambton County that can do that. Thus, the vast majority of the farmland in Lambton is valued far less than anyone else. And I think probably everyone around this table realizes it, but when you look at the farm tax rates, that only applies to the land and outbuildings. So I know some of the people that I've spoken to, they believe that it actually applies to the residents as well, which it doesn't. The residence plus the acre of land around it is assessed just like a residential lot would be in any of our communities. So I think there's that difference that we need to make sure that we keep in mind, that this is strictly for the productivity of the soil and being able to support not only Lambton County but throughout the whole world in agricultural commodities. So those are my two amendments that I'd like to make to the recommendation that's been moved and seconded, and I'd like to make those motions.
Is there a seconder for that, Councillor Marriott? So for my clarity there, we're talking about Table 4. Is that in the scenario 4, combined farm and multi-tax classes ratio reduction?
I believe it is, Mr. Warden.
Which is 0.226, reducing the farmland to 0.226 and multi-residential to 2.0.
Yes, sir. And that's what relates back to the recommendation.
So that is an amendment to the original motion. Discussion on that, Councillor Case.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Warren. Again, I'm all for trying to give our friends in the agricultural industry a break here, by all means. But I'd like to ask through you to Mr. Ennis, with the other part of the amendment, how that would affect us, just for clarification. Please, Mr. Warden.
Thank you, Mr. Warden. If you're referring to the impact of the multi-residential reduction, let's take them independently, and then we'll talk about the cumulative effect. The reduction of the farmland ratio causes a shift onto all the other classes as far as tax liability is concerned. If you look at doing the same thing to the multi-residential ratio as well, it causes the same shift onto other classes. So what we would do here and how the calculation was developed was to reduce the multi-residential rate ratio, which shifted the liability onto the farm, then reduced the farm back down to the target dollar value. That's how it came up to the 226 in the report. And then that table referred to by the Warden, Table 4, and confirmed by Councillor Arnold, shows what the net impact on that would be of doing it. So you do have some shifts in the dollar values from last year that are showing. So the net impact is that there is a minor increase in a lot of these other classes that are there. What it doesn't show is the fact that some of these classes actually would have experienced reductions in the absence of these two shifts that are being proposed at this point in time. In reality, tax policy is simply about deciding what relative portion of tax you believe each class should pay and trying to be equitable in the decision that is there. The analysis was done and the report was presented in order to ensure that you had the information necessary to make the decision. I did not recommend that in my report. I gave you the reasons for that, but I see no reason to comment further. I think that this is as valid a proposal as anything that was on the table.
Further comments or discussion? Councillor Marriott.
Thank you, Warden Weber, to members of County Council, through to Mr. Ennis. And I think when you said minor, I think we're talking 0.0 something in, like, on average in those classes, Mr. Ennis?
The farmland reduction is 0.67% across all of them. As an increase, I don't remember what the multi-residential impact was off the top of my head here. It is a minor impact. If we do this, we do find that the reduction in the residential tax rate we were talking about, instead of being about 1.5, I think it was, is very close to almost becoming flat. So there are impacts to it. The bottom line behind it is, yes, you're going to pay more tax. You're shifting about $500,000 off of the farmland class. There's about an additional $300 off of the multi-residential class. So we're taking a total of about $800,000 worth of tax liability and shifting it among the other classes that are there. That's a relatively small amount when you consider the total amount of taxes that are being paid. It's less than, it's just slightly more than 1%. So it is a relatively small amount. But as I said before, it's a matter of being comfortable with the apportionment that is there. And if you believe that, farmland needs to pay less taxes, that's the consequences behind it. And again, when I write the report, I try and write it from the standpoint of an objective analysis and keep any, qualitative aspects of it out. In the end, as I said, it's as valid a proposal as anything else. And when the proposal was written, I will readily admit I did not have the information with regards to the farmland that Councillor Arnold mentioned here. You yourself had mentioned that to me as well in a conversation, Councillor Marriott. That information isn't readily available. We don't always get to see how the MPAC comes up with the values that were there. All I was trying to do in that analysis was make sure that when we were looking at the question of farm tax specifically in this case, that we were taking into account the impacts of assessment ratios and tax rates altogether and what the net impact would be. So again, just trying to make sure that you have information necessary to frame the decision in and be comfortable with the decision you make.
Councillor Marriott, follow up?
Thank you, Warden Weber. Two reasons why I would like to, I seconded the amendment and why I want to support it. The main reason, or one of the first reasons, is in the last few years, our OMPF cuts that we've all experienced in the rural areas. Originally, the majority of those OMPF funds were originally farm tax rebate that started in the 90s and rolled into several programs into one that became OMPF, but the majority of it was farm tax rebate. And as we've seen, the policy of the current government changed the formula so that the OMPF dollars flowed to the urban areas more than the rural areas. So in the last 4 years, us rural areas have had to increase taxes to make up for the loss of the OMPF funds. And we're not talking 1 or 2 or 3%. We're talking 10% a year in the last 3 years. So we were going to be hit twice here because we've had to pay higher taxes, losing those OMPF funds, and now with the increased assessments in this tax period of the next 3 years left out of the 4, we've already experienced it last year. Sitting at this table a year ago, we thought we were pretty proud of ourselves with a 2.39% increase in the county levy, but that actually ended up being 9% for the county portion in Enniskillen. So the same number is in the budget this year at 2.4. It means another 9% increase for Enniskillen on the county portion alone. I want to make that very clear, and that will happen. So that's why I support lowering the ratio to 2.26. Another reason, many people think that this increased assessment means farmers are well off. Well, I can tell you that the increased assessment of farmland has not meant increased incomes. Sometimes quite the opposite of the cyclical nature of prices. And there's been a lot less number of farmers that have expanded their operations in the last 5 years than those who haven't. There's many that want to but can't afford to pay the market price of farmland as it stands, let alone start paying higher taxes on those assessments. And then you'll have some people say, well, why don't you just sell it and retire? A lot of those farms are rolled into the next generation at a lower percentage of what the market value is. So they never see that market value of that farmland. So I like for everybody to understand that those higher assessments does not mean higher income in the farm across the county right now, and that's another reason they deserve the lower ratio.
Okay. Thank you. Anyone else? Councillor Bradley?
A couple of questions to Mr. Innes. Memory is that if the ratio is reduced on the multi-residential, that the benefit will go to the tenants, not to the owner of the property.
There is legislation provincially that states that a reduction in taxes of a multi-residential class is to be passed on to the tenants, yes. And that's something that your tax clerks have to make sure or provide the information to the owners to do so.
To this morning, because I'd had concerns raised about individuals and groups wanting to make presentations on the vacancy tax rebate. I know you did consultation. You talked to the Sarnia Lambton Chamber of Commerce. There seems to be some disconnect there about how that unfolded in the community. So if I was to ask County Council to table this to the April meeting, just the portion on the vacancy tax rebate, to allow groups and individuals to speak to it, what impact does that have on what you need to do?
The answer directly on the discussions today is that the vacancy rebate can be addressed separately from the question of ratios. You have to make a decision with regards to ratios and the other aspects relating to capping, etc., in order to allow us to proceed to setting tax rates and therefore getting tax bills out. With the vacancy rebate question, that is ancillary to it. It is part of tax policy, but it does not directly impact on the ability to set tax rates today. Where the impact of that comes in is twofold. One, right now, at our request, there is a moratorium of the processing of vacancy rebates across the county. If the decision is tabled and deferred to a later date, we may have to raise that moratorium because there is legislation that says that an application has to be processed within a certain period of time, or there are penalties behind that. So that, again, we would end up possibly having to process vacancy rebates. And if we have vacancy rebates, then we continue to have the situation that led to the recommendation in the first place, which is that we are having property owners able to reduce the value of their property through negotiations with MPAC and then getting a further reduction on top of that by coming for the vacancy rebates, because the legislation says that basically you are able to do that. The reason we did this and came forward with the recommendation that it was is that it is a form of double dipping. In other words, people are getting relief for the same issue twice through the system. And secondly, which, by the way, means that the rest of the taxpayers in the county are subsidizing the taxes on those properties. And the second part behind it, I think is telling as well, is that in the 40 jurisdictions across the county or across the province that have already dealt with this, who represent 85% of commercial and industrial properties, every council has moved to eliminate them because they've recognized the fact that it's a program that is no longer, how shall we say, doing what it was originally designed to do. When it was first created, it was designed to compensate for the fact that the business occupancy tax was rolled into the valuation of properties. The whole valuation methodologies has updated and changed. That's no longer a factor. As I said, if you have a reduction in a property, you go to MPAC and you can ask that the value be returned. We have an example in your municipality where the county actually happens to have some property where that happened quite recently and had significant impacts. So the short answer is you can separate it without affecting the ability to set tax rates. If you do and you defer it, there could be consequences. They're financial as opposed to policy or administrative.
Disagreeing with what you're saying, I just believe that based on the feedback that for whatever reason people didn't have the opportunity to present to this council on this issue. So I'm willing, if it's procedurally correct, to ask that item G, which is the G and H, be tabled to the April meeting for any public input. And that's all I'm going to move forward at this point in time to see if that has any support here.
So this is item.
No impact on the overall motion.
Right.
At this time.
Item G is what you're. So you're asking that item G be tabled till to the next meeting? Councillor Bruzewicz, are you seconding that?
Yes, I'm seconding, and I don't know whether next April is good enough because I would like to have a full engagement so the stakeholders affected by these changes would have an opportunity to rationalize and express their opinion on the matter.
Okay, it's been moved and seconded to table. There is no discussion. There is no discussion on the tabling motion. So we're just dealing with the tabling motion to start with, and we can deal with that while another motion is on the floor of the. So all we're dealing with is tabling item G in the recommendations. G and H. Okay. Yep. Please.
Can I ask for a recorded vote?
Okay.
Ensure that everybody's on the same page. On the tabling motion, we would only be tabling items G and H at page 29 of 420 of your package material, and that deals with the vacancy rebates. If that moves forward, and if you move that ahead, it would leave items A, B, C, D, E, and F of that recommendation as amended by Councillor Arnold and seconded by Marriott, and that is items A and B in terms of the farm classes. So the question, and I believe we've got a recorded vote, the question is to table items G and H for the commercial vacancy rebates, which are again at page 29 of 420 of your materials, but it does not address any other items in that recommendation.
Okay. And we've been asked for a recorded vote.
Just clarification, if I may. Originally, the original amendment was to the next full meeting, which is April.
Yep.
Correct? Okay. That's all I needed to know. Thank you.
So we'll ask for the recorded vote. We do the randomizer.
Councillor Napper.
Starting with Councillor Napper.
Councillor Veen. Councillor Arnold. Yes. Councillor Boucher. Yes. Councillor Bradley. Yes. Councillor Broad. Yes. Councillor Bruzewicz. Yes. Councillor Case. Yes. Councillor Cook. No. Councillor Gilliland. Yes. Councillor Gillis. Yes. Councillor Hand? Yes. Councillor McDougall? No. Councillor Marriott? Yes. Councillor McCharles? No. Councillor McGugan? No. And Warden Weaver?
No.
The motion carries.
Passed. So we're dealing with, we're back to the amendment of the original motion, which is regarding Table 4. So the amendment is adding Table 4, which reduces the farm tax ratio as well as the multi-residential ratio. Councillor McDougall.
Warden Weaver, could you reference the page, please, for us to refer to the correct table without question, because there's two side by side?
It's under Scenario 4, I believe.
Yes. What page?
I don't have a page number for that on mine.
Thank you.
Page 7 of the report. 26. The table is Table 4. Councillor McGugan.
Yeah, Mr. Warden, members of County Council, just for clarification, we are talking about lowering the tax rate on agricultural land. Is that the motion, or is that the amendment we're talking about right now?
That's the amendment.
Okay, thank you for the clarification. I do have a comment. I do appreciate Councillor Arnold and Marriott's comments, and also Councillor Case. It puts me in a little bit of a quandary from the standpoint that I do have a sister and a brother-in-law that live in the great municipality of Chatham-Kent. They are within about a mile of the great municipality of St. Clair, and they just wish they had more land in Lambton County when it comes to farm taxes, because they're paying about 40% more on land, and it's good land. I make no doubt about it, but it's really heavy land. And then a comment that Councillor Arnold mentioned about the quality of land in Lambton. Yes, we have some 1, 2, 3. We also have some 4 and 5. Now, I go into Essex County, and I got some friends there that I've had for years from other associations. And I would say they got some of the toughest land. I hope the press doesn't put this in the paper, but like some of the toughest land in southwestern Ontario. So I am in a quandary. I do realize that agriculture is a big contributor in Lambton County, about $800 million. They do use our county roads. Our trucks are getting heavier. Our grain buggies are getting heavier. So I'm not sure how I'm going to vote on this, but I do have a concern that we do need all the tax dollars that we can. And if we take it off agriculture, we put it on the residents, not only in the municipality of Alveston and Inwood, which are struggling. So I'll just leave that with you. Thank you.
Okay. Councillor Bruzewitz.
Thank you, Mr. Warden. I would like to. I have no hesitation. I'm going to vote for this particular amendment. I'm in favor of it. Councillor Marriott mentioned the health effect of the value, but balance sheet, it actually correlates with higher costs for the farmers. In my personal view, the property taxes are going up. And even if you sell the land, somebody else buys it, then carrying charges, including the interest. Not everybody can spare $5 million in cash to buy this land at increased values. And I think we have to be sensitive of the hit that the farming community is getting. These are the people who feed us, and we have to be concerned about their viability. I'm supporting the motion.
Okay. Councillor Marriott. Oh, sorry. Councillor Knopper had his hand up first. I seen it.
Have we ever, in the past, since market value assessments come in, there's been some big spikes in other residential and stuff like this. We never got too excited about it at that time. I know it went up as high as, I thought, 40 or 50% at one time. There was a big thing there, and it is costing more to maintain these roads that we used to have gravel roads. Then we went to tar and chip. Now they're not standing up, so we've got a lot more expenses in the agriculture area, and so I don't think I'll be supporting this motion.
Okay. Councillor Marriott now.
Thank you, Warden Weber. I just wanted to ask for a recorded vote. Even though I wanted to comment on Councillor Napper's comments, we'd be here all day.
Okay. Any other comments? We'd be voting on the amendment, which is the tax policy with Table 4. Yeah, Council clear, or we'll have it repeated what we're voting on. We'll vote on the amendment, and then we'll have to vote on the motion either as amended or as it is.
So the motion that you would be voting on now, which is being asked to be recorded, is the recommendation that you see at page 29 of 420, paragraphs A, B, C, D, E, F, with paragraph A amended to read that the current broad class ratios for all classes other than the multi-residential class and farm class be maintained. B would be amended to read that the tax class ratio for the multi-residential class be reduced to 2.00 and farm class be reduced to 0.226, period. C, D, E, and F of that recommendation would remain the same. It's a recorded vote request by Councillor Marriott.
So the next, ready to call the question, if we have the randomizer.
All right, Councillor Gilliland, please. Yes. Councillor Gillis? Yes. Councillor Hand? Yes. Councillor McDougall? Yes. Councillor Marriott? Yes. Councillor McCharles? No. Councillor McGugan? No. Councillor Napper? Councillor Vean? Councillor Arnold? Yes. Councillor Bouchy? Yeah. Councillor Bradley? Yes. Councillor Broad? Yes. Councillor Bruzewitz? Yes. Councillor Case? Yes. Councillor Cook? No. And Warden Weber?
No.
The motion carries.
Okay. So we have now before us the motion as amended. A and B have changed. C, D, E, and F are the same. G and H have been tabled. Any question or discussion on the motion that is there?
I think
no need to vote on this motion?
Correct.
Okay. We voted, okay. Yep. So we don't have to have the other motion on the motion as amended.
Correct.
It's already been carried. Okay. Thank you for that clarification. Report C is the proposed grant policy request from other public sector institutions. There's a report, item C, and there's a recommendation there with a couple of minor wording changes. Councillor Bradley?
just a question to the Treasurer. On the recommendation A, it specifically refers to hospitals and colleges. I do recall in the past being approached, this county council was approached by Western University, and I'm just wondering if it should be a bit broader. Not that it means that we're going to donate, but it opens it up to hospitals or educational facilities? Or is that something you considered?
Mr. Innes?
The such as was meant to be as an example, so any wording that you would like, we could simply leave it as public sector organizations. If you wanted such as hospitals and educational institutions, that would be fine. The idea was to make it other public institutions, but try and give some clarity as to what we were talking about. That was the intent. So if you would like to see that amended, I certainly have no objections. The idea was to make it open to the opportunity for council to support, the types of organizations that it has supported in the past.
Okay. I will leave it alone only on the basis that I also don't want this to be waving a flag that we're inviting this. But I just wanted to...
Okay. Any other questions regarding this recommendation? I have no motion on the recommendation. Yeah. Move that.
Yeah.
Seconded by Councillor Broad. Discussion. All in favor? Opposed? Carried. I believe that's all the reports. Oh, Councillor Broad.
Thank you, Councillor or Warden Weaver. I think it's at this point I've got a motion that I'd like to bring forward. I was waiting for the report from John before I did that. My apologies, I didn't put a consideration in for the motion earlier, other than I didn't get John's report, of course, until Thursday or Friday this week. So my motion I'm going to make, and I hope I have a seconder, and then I would like to have a good discussion on it, that $1 million be taken from the Opportunity Contingency Fund and put in the hospital capital reserve for 2018, and that for the 2019 budget onward, that $1 million be part of the budget yearly. I'll ask for a seconder, hopefully, Bill.
Seconded by Councillor Case. Put on the floor. Discussion. Councillor Broad.
Thanks, Warden Weber. This motion I put forward to you guys, I've been doing a lot of thinking about it. I looked at our $213 million budget, and we know we have numerous requests from the hospitals and foundations. We can all sit around this table and we all know that healthcare in Ontario is in a crisis mode. Our provincial government has already announced they are not going to fund any equipment. So we got two options. We can keep our head in the sand and beat our chest and tell the province that you have to supply more money, and they're not going to. They're financially broke. We know that. Or we can come up with a solution. And I've decided to take the option 2 and come up with a solution. And basically what I'm asking you to do is we're getting these requests come forward to us, and then we get 3 weeks or a month to kind of review the request, and we have to make kind of a rash decision on whether we want to support different hospital foundations. By doing this, by putting this money in there, that allows us some opportunity that we don't have to make approve the request right at budget time. It puts the money, it's in there every year. We can go through it, we can review it. My concern with some of these hospital requests, especially when we get outside our boundaries, what are other municipalities doing? And I think that's a fair question. I'm not putting it in there for Lambton County to be a cash cow. We are not a cash cow. I want to make that very clear to any hospital foundation or anybody. We're not a cash cow, but we are here to help the people. When I look at my request that I'm putting in today, my request today will affect everybody in this room at some point or the other. I ask you to look at your budget, go through your categories, and find me one category where everybody in the county will benefit from. There isn't many. So when I went through and I was trying to figure out how do we pay for this thing, and what kind of money, the money that I'm asking for, where does it look? Today, at 126,000 people in Lambton County, we spend $80 per resident for general government, $37 for corporate services, $39 for finance, facilities, and court services, $114 for the infrastructure and development, $77 for public health services, $112 for social services, $52 for long-term care, $75 for cultural services. Take off the libraries, which is $52 per resident. We're paying $23 per resident for 2 museums and an art gallery. So where does my $1 million come in? It's a $7.95 ask per resident of Lambton County for everybody in the county to be able to benefit from it. And I see more benefits than that. What I see right off the bat is doctor recruitment. Don Eufemi is going through a terrible doctor recruitment period right now. We have a doctor just announced he's retiring, and our people are scrambling. They cannot find a doctor. This can't help but improve doctor recruitment. If a doctor recruitment team goes to a doctor today and says, Lambton County is willing to give $1 million, up to $1 million a year for hospital equipment, I would think that's got to be a big bonus. We talk about retaining and attracting new people to Lambton County. It can't help but be a wonderful thing for that. If I was somebody moving into Sarnia-Lambton and seeing where the county council was giving this $1 million to keep the hospitals up, it has to help. And one thing about it, if it doesn't help, you're still getting benefit from it because you still are putting equipment in the hospitals. The other thing that I see is there's potential to reduce wait times. We all know today wait times are a terrible thing. If a piece of equipment goes down, it backlogs the system 2 weeks. So it can't help but improve that. So all I'm asking of the county and of my fellow county councilors is to put this money in reserve. If we don't use it in a single year, it can stay there. It's sitting in the opportunity contingency today. Why can't it sit in the reserve fund? I don't think we're going to have our doors being knocked down any different now with this fund there than what we are today. We know the hospital foundations are out there having bake sales, car shows, doing whatever they can to raise whatever dollars they can. I don't see a big influx coming into the county because we got this. It doesn't put a sign up the door that says, welcome to County of Lambton, we'll give you money. The other thing I would like to do with it, though, we need somebody to kind of have a policy. We have a policy that we just approved. I think it needs to be more stringent on this hospital capital fund. And the reason why I say that is, number one, I want to see what other municipalities are doing if we go outside the county boundaries. I don't have a problem giving the money. I know our people use it, but let's see how the other people are doing to support these outside facilities. So I think we need to put that maybe in the AM committee, put that under their jurisdiction. But anytime any money leaves this fund, it comes back to county council, and it's a full county council that decides. I want to make that very clear. I don't want to make this where it's, we're just going to give the money out. It needs to come back to county council. And I ask for your support on this motion. Thank you.
Just I need to clarify. Are you asking that we add $1 million to our budget this year, or are you saying the $1 million that was going into opportunities and contingency go to this hospital fund this year, and next year there's $1 million added to the budget? Or are we taking away the opportunities and contingent fund money?
So today the opportunity contingency fund has about $8.4 million, with $1.45 slated in this budget to go into it. We would take $1 million. I don't care whether you take it out of the 1.45 we're putting in 2018 or whether you take it out of the 8.4. I don't care where you take it, but there will be $1 million coming out, whatever's in that fund. So it's not going to affect our budget this year at all. Next year, it will go in as a budget item automatically. I want it in there as a yearly budget item like all these other things that we do. I know we have room next year. If we look at our budget, there's rooms where we can improve. We know that. We can all look around this table. It's $213 million, and to get a fine $1 million isn't a big deal.
Okay. I just wanted to clarify. There was a couple hands. I'd seen Councillor Bruzewitz.
Thank you, Mr. Warden. I feel I'm blackmailed into supporting this motion. The healthcare is supposed to be provincial responsibility. On one hand, I could say, well, why do we overstep the boundaries of that? On the other hand, the province for the last at least 30 years has been abdicating the responsibility for the healthcare of our citizens. We do not have the universal healthcare is a myth that we still don't see in action. And, health is wealth. I've been saying that time and time and time again, at the different times, either at the municipal level or when I was a candidate in 2008 in federal and 2011 in provincial election. And I haven't changed my position a bit. We do have to fill that gap that is missing. Hopefully, if the province starts to take the responsibility seriously, that would be needed. But right now, we're forced, as far as I know, because health is what means the productive society. Without it, we will be failing and will be less productive. Like people who have health issues should have them fixed at the affordable level, and for that reason, I will be supporting the motion by Councillor Broad.
Any other discussions? I think I had seen Councillor Gillis's hand first. and then we'll go.
Thank you, Warden Weber. I just wanted to have a couple of questions to Councillor Broad, just so I'm clear on this. So, Councillor Broad, you're looking to create a hospital equipment reserve, correct? Okay, hospital capital equipment reserve. So it's exclusively for equipment, correct?
I was going to have a hospital capital reserve.
Okay. Okay. The second thing I wanted to know was we are referring to this in the context of the Strathroy ask. So if this particular monies is taken from the Operation and Contingency Reserve and put into and created a new reserve, would we still be looking at giving $1 million, or I'm sorry, whatever the ask was, I'd have to go back to the Strathroy ask, or would we wait and see what the other municipalities in the Strathroy-Caradoc area were going to contribute to Middlesex?
I guess really that question is for the rest of County Council. If we get this money put there, we do have the Strathroy one coming after that, and I guess it would be whatever County Council's decision is on part of that.
Okay. Councillor Arnold.
Thank you, Warden Weber. I was just wondering if the mover would look for a friendly amendment that instead of $1 million on from going forward, that we would put 1% of the 2 that goes into that fund. It'd only be 728, but it makes it simpler if, you know, as the years go on or whatever, instead of having a hard number. And so it'd be half of what we would normally put in the Opportunities and Contingency Fund. So I'm just wondering if he would accept a friendly amendment and if I can make that amendment, that we would have 1% starting in 19 going into that fund.
1%
of the Opportunities and Contingencies Fund that we would normally put in there, just reallocate it to the fund that Councillor Broad is looking at.
Okay.
Is that clear as mud?
How much is that?
I think it's 728, 522, or something like that in the budget. But next year it'll be different, right?
You're talking 1% of the budget.
Of the Opportunities and Contingency Fund, we send 2% into that now. Yeah. So instead of sending 2 from starting in 19, we would only send 1, and then 1 would go here instead of that hard number.
So we're cutting the Opportunities Fund in half.
For future time of new money coming into it.
Okay.
Is that understandable?
As long as the council understands it. Councillor Bradley? So I guess, is that a friendly amendment? Is Councillor Broad?
I think it's a votable amendment.
Votable amendment? Is there a seconder for that? Councillor Gilliland? Discussion. Councillor Bradley had his hand up next to you.
Against the motion and the amendment. I appreciate, and I did appreciate Mayor Broad contacting me last week on the issue. We're setting up future councils to be a banker for every hospital around us and in this county too. We're the only county that I know of that is funding outside of its boundaries. And while I can, in general terms, support Strathroy based on the merits of use from Lambton, I'm not going to be supporting it for the money being asked. But I want to just come back to the real issue, is that if you look at the all the grants that are being requested today, we don't set up a grant fund. We don't say there's $500,000 or there's $1 million there and come forward and take your chances. And I think that's what we're doing here. The way it is now, if there's a request coming forward, and say that request from Strathroy passes or Blue Water Health next year, we will draw it from that one particular fund. But by doing this, you're telegraphing there's always going to be a pot of money there. And I like the way it is now, and I go back to the grants that are on the table today, that some will be accepted, some will be rejected. And I think every year each council should make their own determination and not allocate a certain amount of money. And by doing this, I think it is, and I appreciate the spirit behind it, I think we should leave it as it is, because there will be years we decide, because of other issues, other costs, other needs in the county, that we're not funding certain things. but it should be an annual discussion. And so I will not be supporting the amendment or the motion.
Okay. Councillor Case, Councillor McDougall, and Councillor McGugan.
Mr. Warden, through you, I want to applaud Mayor Broad for bringing this forward today. Unfortunately, in the province of Ontario today, we are in a crisis situation. And we talk about things. We're going to be looking at economic development and tourism and other things today as well through this process. And we do support those things. We do have an aging population. Health care is key to our existence in Lambton County. As much as I can agree with Mayor Bradley's comments as well, we don't want to be known and looked at as a bank, an opportunity for every organization out there. But I do think that Mayor Broad has brought an awful lot of content and information to this. When you think about it, $7 per resident. That's not a big price tag. And although I agree 100%, this is a provincial responsibility. I've always felt that way. I do think that we do have a responsibility here in Lambton County to be proactive. So again, I want to thank Mayor Broad for bringing this information forward. And I do not feel like I'm being blackmailed into doing anything today. We all have an opportunity to make a choice. So just a comment, Mr. Warden, and I'll leave it at that.
Okay. Councillor McDougall.
Yeah. Thank you, Warden Weber, members of County Council, and thank you, Councillor Broad, for our discussion a couple of days ago that had my husband and I busy over our coffee table for the next couple of days. In appreciating the spirit of Councillor Broad's motion of providing support on a capital basis to hospitals in the region, I also appreciated the information that was provided by Finance through Mr. Innes about the history of some of the contributions that have been made to hospitals in our region over time, some before I even held a seat on this county council. In addition, I reflected on some of the support that has been given to public institutions overall, because that's also something that County Council, with a great deal of pride, certainly by this councillor, has provided to public institutions in our area. And as I reflected towards this discussion today on the amount of money that we set aside, which was quite extraordinary, to the build of the new Blue Water Health facility in my own municipality, I also recalled that as that allocation and that commitment wound down, we very quickly found money within that funding envelope to address our capital repair deficit in our social housing. I know that we have some aging long-term care homes. We have our own asset management that we have to be responsible to. I look at the fact that as I averaged it out over 20 years, I was thinking we're on average probably allocating about $1 million to public institution funding. Currently, about $833,333 for the next 5 years to Lambton College, which is a public institution as well. I have absolutely no problem in supporting area hospitals. And I recognize in my deep read of the Strathroy request that 3 of our municipal partners in this room, Warwick Township, Brooke Alvinston, and Lambton Shores, many of their residents are choosing that institution. And I appreciate where Councillor Broad talked about the fact that healthcare choice really has no boundaries. Specialties are planted in hospitals, urban and rural, to strengthen them so that they can be sustained into the future. But I like the idea of a public institution allocation annually. I think that public institutions in this area are important to the future of attracting people, investment in business, investment in our economy, people moving here. And I absolutely agree with Councillor Broad that every single one of us is going to be shopping from our local hospitals and our regional hospitals over the course of our family lives. I have a preference, however, for looking at these requests that come our way. Councillor Bradley makes a good point. When we get to budget, there's always requests beyond public institution requests. And I have always felt a heavy responsibility to read and understand all those requests that come to us. And I agree with Councillor Broad that it's unfortunate a bit that it's a compressed read and it's tough decision-making to decide who gets through the gate and who doesn't. However, there is only so much money to go around. And we have no crystal ball, at least this councillor has no crystal ball, of what our own capital pressures are going to be moving forward. And if we allocate and continue to allocate and set up a new hospital alone reserve, then I really worry about what future budgets are going to have to look like. And I really struggle to think that we have been putting 2% a year into opportunities and contingencies, and we have the ability as decision makers to shop from that reserve for any requests before us. That's where I think that reserve should be. One reserve available to all of us when the time comes to answer any and all requests. So while I appreciate the spirit, and Councillor Broad said to me the other day, he's after robust conversation today, after thinking about it for a few days, I'm here to support the spirit of it, and I believe that we should continue to do it from the 2% that goes into opportunities and contingencies, and I also like the spirit of the public institution changes to our grant policy. Thank you.
Councillor McGugan.
Yeah, Mr. Warden, members of the County Council, I appreciate all the comments that have been made. Now, Brooke Alverson has a council meeting tomorrow, and there's a request there sitting on my desk at home from Southwest Middlesex, which is the Newberry Hospital. They're wanting money from the municipality of Brooke Alverson for the next 3 years. I do not know where that money is going to come from. Now, this is maybe off topic, but it's still to do with hospitals. So that's my comment. Great concerns. Councillor Case mentioned it's a provincial issue. It is, but you can't seem to make any headway with the government we got today.
Councillor Boucher.
The council, I didn't know where the hospital was. I didn't until I started reading about it. I was quite impressed for various reasons. The quality of the hospital, the service, the employees they employ, the pressure they take off other hospitals like Sarnia and Petrolia and others. That counts. And to me, this motion and other motions, it seems to me just complicate things. They ask for this money, you either give it to or you don't. Because for me, I came to, after 4 or 5 hours reading about this hospital, I was convinced right there and then that they deserve that amount and we should give it without reservation.
Okay. Councillor Bruzewitz.
Just to sum up my strong support for this motion from Councillor Broad, I would like to dedicate my vote to all the victims of the deficiency of our healthcare system. The last one is Heather Campbell. She's not with us anymore. And if we didn't have these holes there, she'll be still with us. Thank you.
Councillor Napper.
Yeah, I'm just trying to get a little handle on this. So if that motion that we have on the floor now was in today, you're talking about now you cut the contingency fund down to 700 and some thousand, so we wouldn't be able to meet what they requested today. And what happened if Petrolia come along on the same amount of money? We're sitting here, we have to pick and choose then, do we? As who we're going to fund. There's other way you got the flexibility of it. I'm just kind of confused. And all due respect to the report, I like to see something that I can read for a night or so to really understand it, but it gets confusing then when people stand up and start making motions against motions and stuff like this. And I think if you went around the table, there's a lot of people who don't understand it yet. But I just wondered, how would that work? Would you have to get in a waiting line? Because that would take care of that contingency fund for 5 years. So there you go. You funded one project.
Who wants to respond? Councillor Gilliland?
Thank you, Mr. Warden. I think my question is a little bit like Councillor Napper's. The motion on the floor is to put money in a contingency fund. It doesn't speak to the ask that Strathroy Middlesex has asked for. I understand that we will deal with that at another time, maybe not today, but another time.
The Strathroy request will come up later in the agenda. Right now, the motion is to create another reserve fund for hospital funding.
So
and it's been amended to be, the motion has been amended to have a percentage similar to the contingencies and reserve fund percentage that's annually in our budget. But there's no change to this year's budget numbers because we're just taking it from contingencies and putting it into that hospital fund for this year. Next year it'll be, the contingencies fund is going to be cut in half. Half will go to contingencies, half will go to hospitals. Okay. Am I clear, straight? Any other? Councillor Broad, and then Councillor Case once again.
I just want to clear things up. Let's not muddy the water. All I'm asking is we pull $1 million of the Opportunity Contingency Fund and we're going to put it into a Hospital Capital Reserve Fund. So we're taking from Peter, we're going to pay Paul. Then when we get a request in, such as Strathroy's, we go look what's in that reserve and see what we can do with it. Not go to the Opportunities and Reserve or Contingency Fund. We've already got a reserve sitting here for this specific purpose. If we don't spend a nickel out of it this year, we've got $1 million heading into next year. Petrolia comes along, we know we got $1 million. If we approve the budget next year with the $1 million in it, we have $2 million now. So let's not get this too complicated. We're just trying to pull money. I want it specifically set aside. Leave it in opportunity contingencies. It's just there for whatever you want to spend it on. This way here, it's put aside. And it doesn't commit this council or the previous councils to anything. Next year at budget time, any county councillor can put a motion in to remove it. We got the funding going on at the college. Yeah, we got 3 more years of it. Yeah, we are committed there. But for what I'm doing here, anybody can pull it out next year. Any part of the budget next year, any county councillor can pull out, as long as they get approval from the rest of county council. So we're not tying any council's hands. And to Steve's amendment, I want to speak to it. I have a hard time supporting it because now we're going from $7.95 down to $5.95 per resident of Lambton County. Today, we spend $11.88 per resident of Lambton County to keep the art gallery open again this year. $1.45 million. $11.88 per resident. And we can't come up with $7.95 for health care? Come on, guys. We've got the money. We can afford to do that. If we can afford to do that, we can afford the health care part of it. I'm sorry.
Councillor Case, then Councillor Bradley.
So, Mr. Warren, through you, what I like about doing this is that it's a specific amount of money that's put away in the budget. Whether it's $1 million or it's $700 and some thousand, it's there. And what that does, and again, anything can change, but what that does, as much as I don't want people lining up, and I am a little concerned about people lining up and coming to us like we're a bank for everybody, but what it does, I mean, there's a cap on that amount of money within the budget. So whether it's $1 million or it's $750,000 or whatever the number is, Steve, it's a cap. So we have in the past, we funded Blue Water Health at $1.5 million a year for 10 years. Okay? That was done by a previous council, and it was supported by most but not supported by everybody. But at the end of the day, this caps the amount of money that we have available. And as Mayor Broad said, if it doesn't get utilized or it doesn't get the okay from County Council through a motion, it won't happen. So as much as I can see it being a little bit complicated in some aspects, really at the end of the day, the actual putting the money into a reserve is not complicated for me at all. There's so many dollars available. You have to apply for it, just like other hospital organizations have in the past, and it's that simple for me. So anyways, that's my second 2 cents worth, and it'll be my last. Thank you, Mr. Warden.
Okay. Councillor Bradley.
I just want to bring some balance to this. We have social housing in this county that is substandard. You want to talk about, we got 1,300 units out there that we've grappled with ever since we got it downloaded on us. And I understand, and again, I have all the respect in the world for the argument being made by Mayor Broad. But I also look at, these are tax dollars from Lambton County, and even on the expenditure to Blue Water Health, I reluctantly came to that at the end because the hospital wouldn't have been built without it. But all these things that have been given to us, we're still struggling with. And social housing is the one that stands out to me. Is it a $40 million obligation out there to even get this up to a level of standards? And that doesn't even include the people out there that don't have affordable housing in Sarnia-Lambton. So I guess my point on this is that I still think we should every year sit down and look at the priorities and not put aside funds that automatically will be applied for, and I can tell you will be expended. And I understand the spirit of this, but I believe strongly that each year the council should deal with these issues as they come along and make a decision, and not bind us, because we're falling into the trap. And I understand why we're falling into the trap. That's why we did Blue Water Health. That's why we did Newberry. And again, I'm not opposed to a donation of some sort to Strathroy. But just because you ask for $1 million doesn't mean you're going to get $1 million. But let's not forget the basic things that we're struggling with in Lambton County that we can't address to the degree we want to. And that, particularly in my case, is social housing.
Okay. Who was...
Can I recorded vote too, please, Bill?
A recorded vote? We have to vote on the amendment, which is a... Please.
Thank you very much. I'll go through both motions and explain the amendment, and then I think we have a request for a recorded vote on the amendment. So the first motion by Councillor Broad, seconded by Councillor Case, is that for 2018, that $1 million from the current contributions to contingencies and opportunities fund and or the current account or amounts in that account be allocated specifically to a hospital capital grant fund. And secondly, moving forward for 2019 and beyond, that every year that $1 million be allocated towards a hospital grant request fund. That's the main motion. The amended motion presented by Councillor Arnold and seconded by Councillor Gilliland would read as follows: that there be $1 million in 2018 allocated to a hospital grant fund. However, for 2019 moving forward, that 50%, i.e. 1% of the 2% that is allocated to opportunities and contingencies funds in the budget every year be allocated to hospital grant funds, leaving 1% for a general opportunities and contingencies fund. So the motion that is currently on the table, should you accept it, would result in this action. One, that $1 million in 2018 be allocated out of the contingency and opportunities fund to a hospital grant request fund. And secondly, moving forward for 2019 and beyond, that 50% of the 2% contribution to contingencies and opportunities fund be specifically allocated to a hospital grant request fund. That's the question that's on the table. No, I cannot. It's recorded, though.
It's recorded. Okay, so we'll As for a recorded vote, we will call the vote, starting with Councillor McCharles.
Councillor McGugan. Councillor Namper. Councillor Veen. Councillor Arnold.
Yes.
Councillor Boucher.
No.
Councillor Bradley. No. Councillor Broad.
Yes.
Councillor Bruzewitz.
No.
Councillor Case.
Yes.
Councillor Cook.
No.
Councillor Gilliland.
Yes.
Councillor Gillis.
Yes.
Councillor Hand.
Yes.
Councillor McDougall.
No.
Councillor Marriott. And Warden Weaver.
No. So we will go
It
back
fails.
to...
The motion fails.
So we go back to the original motion.
The amendment fails. That's correct?
The amendment failed. Yes, I voted no. No. I voted no. It's not listed up there. Oh, okay. Yeah. So now we're back to the original motion.
The main motion. Do you want me to repeat it?
Yeah, let's repeat the original motion.
The original motion, brought forward by Councillor Broad, seconded by Councillor Case, is that $1 million out of the current opportunities and contingencies funds either contemplated in today's budget and or in the bank account be allocated specifically in 2018 for hospital grant requests, and that moving forward in 2019 and beyond, that $1 million be presented in the budget for purposes of hospital grant requests.
Clear on the motion? Recall the question. All in favor? Okay. I was waiting for that. I didn't hear that before. We'll do another recorded vote on this one. Starting with Councillor Napper.
Sorry, what was that? Councillor Veen, Councillor Arnold. No. Councillor Boucher.
No.
Councillor Bradley. No. Councillor Broad.
Yes.
Councillor Bruzewitz.
Yes.
Councillor Case.
Yes.
Councillor Cook. No. Councillor Gilliland.
Yes.
Councillor Gillis.
Yes.
Councillor Hand.
Yes.
Councillor McDougall.
No.
Councillor Marriott.
Yes.
Councillor McCharles.
Yes.
Councillor McGugan.
No.
Warden Weaver.
No. That
Motion fails.
I believe that's, before we start our budget deliberations, we've been an hour and a quarter, and I think we'll take a 10-minute recess, stretch, and then we'll get into the grant request. Are we ready? Do I need to bang it real hard, or we're ready to go? Okay. I won't. So, item number 8. Everyone has brought their binder with them, and I would ask Mr. Innes to go through the procedures, procedural guide on the grant requests. Mr. Innes?
Thank you, Mr. Warden. Again, this memo is just provided as a bit of a refresher and a reference for everybody. As you're going through the let's call it the meat and potatoes of today's session, the first item that you'll be asked to consider is going to be the items referred to budget. That's under tab 2 of your binder. There's one item that's under consideration today. And again, that money is not currently in the budget, so if you do approve the proposal, that would be a matter of adding it. In this particular case, that does not have an immediate impact onto taxation in this year, well, not necessarily, because it's actually, I'm wrong. It does have an impact. I'm sorry. I'm getting myself confused here today. But again, it's not, that money is not currently into the budget, so a vote in favor of the item referred to budget would be a matter of adding it to expenditures and then finding a funding source for it. Council grants, you have a total of 7 grants that are shown in, or new requests that are shown in the grant overview. The first one, which is for the oversized load corridor, that was provided simply as a FYI and a reminder to Council that you had voted to do that earlier or late last year, actually. What that says is that if the money comes from the province, that the county will match it. That comes out of opportunities and contingencies. So there is no budget impact on that. There is a possibility of an impact on gross expenditures. And again, the reason we're putting it there is just to remind you that you've made this commitment previously, and so that we don't lose sight of that. The other 6 that are there are all new requests that have come in that you have not previously taken any action on. So again, if you vote in favor of a grant, it will increase the gross expenditures, and then the decision has to be made on how to fund those grants as well. Beyond that, procedurally, we'll remind you that as we have been doing for about a half dozen years now, we go on the exception basis. If you do not want to change something in the budget as it is presented to you, you simply can accept it and move on to the next. So if you did like last year and you wanted to vote to approve the budget without any changes, in theory, all it takes is one motion to do that. Otherwise, if you want to see a change, it's best to put the motion onto the floor and then proceed accordingly. Managers are in the room and are available. The questions we would ask be first directed to the GM. If the GM feels that the manager can provide additional input towards the question that is there, we will ask them to come up to the rail. We have a microphone waiting for them there so that they will be able to address council and speak to the issue that is being presented. They will not be making presentations, so if you do not have a question, then we will proceed on to the next. Otherwise, we go through the budget book in the order in which it is presented, and I think at this point in time, Mr. Warden, I will just refer it back to you and to council to proceed with their deliberations.
Okay. Thank you for that. So we're on page 192, which is a grant request for the Strathroy Middlesex General Hospital Foundation, a request of $1,050,000. Councillor Case.
I would move to provide the total amount over the 10 years as requested. I believe was $1,050,000, Mr. Warden.
Motion to provide the full amount over 10 years, seconded by Councillor McGugan. And that would be added to, that'll be an addition to the percentage on the budget. Questions regarding that? Going to call the question. All in favor? Opposed? Motion is carried. We want a recorded vote. We can ask for that. Recorded vote for the $1,050,000 equally over a 10-year period from the added to the tax levy. Yes. Who asked for a recorded vote? Councillor Arnold. Okay, we'll get the randomizer. Doesn't want to do that. Sorry. Councillor Bradley?
Yes. Your preference. It appears this is going to pass. Taking it on the, putting it on the levy, or taking it from the Widows and Orphans Fund, whatever that fund's called.
I'm going to say staff. I'm going to use this collectively. I don't think, really have a preference one way or the other. We can talk about the implications behind it. If you take it from opportunities and contingencies, you've not really funded a grant request going forward. The question is going to be, is that to come out of that every year for the next 10 years, or is that to come out of that just this year and then be built into the levy next year? That would be the first question. Otherwise, it's just simply for us, it's a matter of understanding where you, whether you want us to take it from levy directly or take it from levy indirectly. The net impact of taking it from opportunities and contingencies is to reduce the funds that are available into that. So it's, from that standpoint, it's simply a matter of clarifying exactly what it is that you're looking for.
The motion is clear that it comes off, it's added to the levy. And we've been asked for a recorded vote, and I believe we're at Councillor McDougall to start. I would ask the clerk to call the roll.
Councillor McDougall? Yes. Councillor Marriott? No. Councillor McCharles? No. Councillor McGugan? Yes. Councillor Napper? Yes. Councillor Veen? Councillor Arnold? No. Councillor Boucher? Yes. Councillor Bradley? No. Councillor Broad? Yes. Councillor Bruzewitz? Councillor Case? Yes. Councillor Cook? Yes. Councillor Gilliland? Yes. Councillor Gillis? Yes. Councillor Hand? Yes. Warden Weaver?
Yes.
The motion carries.
Okay. Item B is Community Living Sarnia Lambton grant request in the amount of $45,000 for purchase of a 1718 Dodge Caravan with side access. And Councillor Bradley?
I'm going to move that to a recommendation, and I can just speak to it if I can get a seconder.
Is there a seconder for that? Councillor Gillis?
It fits in very well what the county's talked about with transportation throughout the county. It's an outcome of what's happened with the closure of the sheltered workshops, which is a positive thing for the province of Ontario and for the people that work there as they transition. This is just, it's a good investment that will pay dividends throughout the county. So I think it's a good project.
Okay. And that would be funded from the levy as a levy increase, one time?
Widows and Orphans Fund. It's a small expenditure, and I don't think it should be on the levy.
Councillor Arnold?
I just had a question. I was going through a lot of the information here, of course, like everybody else, but I see they're carrying a 2014 van now. It's got till 2020 to pay it off, paying $600 a month. Is this a replacement, or is this an addition to the one that they already show in their books? I don't know how many they have. Maybe they only have one. Maybe they have 5. I just don't know. So I'm just curious, personally.
Is someone have that information? Councillor McDougall?
Warden Weaver, members of County Council, having served on the board a number of years ago for community living, many years ago now, I want to speak in favor of this grant request. I know from my own experience in the city that the vans that move their people around are very, very important. Just as Lambton Elderly Outreach and all the other transporters in the County of Lambton, the vehicles are used to move people from here to there. Part of my rationale for supporting this is understanding the average age of people who are going to be utilizing the Wawanosh replacement program to be 54 years of age. I fear that without a robust fleet to transport aging people taking advantage of community living, that family who's likely to be older or busy at work wouldn't be able to get these people into this new replacement program to Wawanosh. So I do feel compelled to support it, and like my colleague Councillor Bradley, I don't think it's a lot of money, and I do believe that's why we have the opportunities and contingencies reserved to support our community.
Okay. Councillor Gillis.
Thank you, Warden Weber, members of County Council. Just for information, I do believe at the presentation that they did say that this was an addition to their fleet.
Okay. I guess that was what I was going to ask. We didn't get you an answer, but I think now we do. Okay. So the motion's on the floor that this grant be approved for the van, and it be taken from the operations or opportunities and contingency fund. Any further questions? Councillor McGugan.
Gordon, maybe I could make a recommendation that every request here be a recorded vote. That way we don't have to keep asking.
Okay. We can do that. I would call that if there's no further discussion, I would ask the clerk to call for a recorded vote. If we can get that. There we go. Councillor Bruzewicz starts it off.
Councillor Bruzewicz. Yes. Councillor Case. Yes. Councillor Cook.
He's
yes, of course. Councillor Gilliland. Yes. Councillor Gillis. Yes. Councillor Hand. Yes. Councillor McDougall. Yes. Councillor Marriott. Yes. Councillor McCharles. Yes. Councillor McGugan. Yes. Councillor Napper. Yes. Councillor Arnold. Yes. Councillor Bradley. Bushy. Yes. Councillor Bradley. Yes. Councillor Broad. Yes. And Warden Weaver.
Yes.
That motion carries.
Okay. Moving on to item C, the Decker Bauer Foundation grant request, the amount of $80,000 for temporary funding for its operations. Someone prepared to start the discussion on this or make a motion for either to approve or deny this grant? Councillor Bruzewicz. Which way? To approve it? Funding from?
Levy.
On the levy? Do I have a seconder? Calling for the second time. Do I have a seconder? Councillor Napper, you'll second that? Okay. Discussion on this. Councillor Bradley.
Venture down, but we set up a policy that we would not give operating funds. And I don't like to be in this position. I'm sure none of you like to be in this position, particularly given the merits of the cause and the efforts that have been made. I would point out to you, this council, I think it was 2 or 3 years ago, we brought forward a motion to donate furniture to this organization, which passed, and the county staff worked that out for the organization. More than willing to help them in other areas, and again, this is difficult, but the fact is, in each of our communities, you could come up with 20, 30, 40 groups that would like to come to county council and receive operating funds. And as challenging and difficult it is, I just can't support giving operating funds. Capital, yes, but the second we go down that road, we've opened the door to every other organization who can make cases just as valid, if not more valid, for why they should receive funding. So I can't support the motion on that basis, and it's painful to do it, but I think we have to be consistent in our approach to all these things.
Councillor Case and then Councillor Arnold.
Yes, Mr. Warden, and I agree with Mayor Bradley's comments. Just one quick question. I'm pretty sure I know the answer to our treasurer, Mr. Innes. Mr. Innes, did you make the folks aware that this did not meet the requirements when they brought it forward? Just for the record, sir.
Yes, Councillor. Anytime a grant does not meet the criteria, the applicant is informed. They indicated to the fact that they understood that, but we always give them the opportunity to come and plead the case regardless.
Okay. Councillor Arnold.
Thank you, Warden Weber. I just wondering if we have any type of funding that we could help them with through Andrew's group or public health or whatever. And maybe there's something there through some of the grant funds that are transitioned over to us from the province that we could help redirect to just help them out a little bit. Because what I read in here was that it says temporary, but it looked like a permanent position to me.
That Andrew? Yeah.
Sure, I can respond to that through you, Warden. Public health does not have any direct funding that could support this type of ask. But certainly what we are doing in public health is we're involved in a very active mental health strategy. And the medical officer health will be coming to council to sort of expand on that strategy. And the vision is to include partners like Decker Bauer in the initiatives. But that's where we can sort of assist with this type of work.
Councillor Gillis.
Thank you, Warden Weber, members of County Council. Yes, this is really a head and heart type of ask. And even though our heart may want us to give, understanding the circumstances, realizing that we are the governance body and we do have the parameters of policies to follow. I was very encouraged to hear Mr. Taylor speak to this, and I know that Ms. Rochorn herself has looked into various ways of aiding within the confines of what we have already allocated, and they have to follow the rules and regs that the province puts down. But I'm encouraged to hear what Mr. Taylor is saying regarding partnerships, and I hope that there can be something within the LHIN that will allow for this type of latitude, even though it is perhaps not sanctioned, but it certainly does fill a gap. And sometimes people need to go to the Decker Bauer Foundation simply because it isn't so heavily regulated as others. So I'm encouraged in one respect that there perhaps may be partnerships, that the LHIN may be able to accommodate this as they have in other things that we have done, because there is a gap and they are filling it.
Okay. Councillor Knapper.
Yeah, I'm going to support this $13,000. I don't know. I suppose that'd be 4 cents a person if you looked at it that way, Pal Broad. I've personally put on a couple of clinics for suicide prevention, and it's just running rampant. And I think it's a bit of an outbreak right now. There's I think a big crisis on, and if we can just save some family or going through that. I've been through it with some friends and stuff, and it's not fun. And I just think there's so many organizations tied in with this. I see that whole list of people that was tied in with them there. Just getting the word out and get these kids talking to each other and get the dialogue going. And I just think even for the 1 year, if we can, just slow this tragedy down, I think we've done a wonderful thing here.
I believe it's $80,000. That was not 13. 13's for the next one. That's for the. So it's $80,674. Councillor McDougall and then Councillor McGugan.
Warden Weber, members of County Council, with all due respect to all organizations in our community, including Decker Bauer, who are working hard to address mental health and other issues that challenge many of our residents, some connected to addictions, some connected to other matters. Mental health is gaining profile across the nation. Senior governments are beginning to make a response to the call for action, and I'm pleased to see that. I also know that in the framework of properly funded organizations through provincial or federal funding streams, that there's oversight, there's accountability, but more important, the sustainability factor, which is what I'm always after, would be met. This was to bridge the day when they would receive permanent funding. I note, as Councillor Bradley said, that it's operating and not capital. We have supported Decker-Bauer capital requests in the past, but again, in absence of us stepping forward with operating funds, the pressure is on senior governments and the ministries that deal with mental health and social service and other services delivered and funded from senior government. The call is for them to step forward, and they need to look at mental health. They need to look at addictions. They need to look at outcomes in our community. And as much as I regret not being able to support this request, senior governments need to take the message of our stance and step forward and start taking this more seriously, along with the LHIN, that is the mechanism that is there to fund great community programs.
Councillor McGugan.
Yeah, Mr. Ward, members of County Council, just a comment first and then maybe a friendly amendment. The comment is, it's really interesting in our communication how our two members, federal and provincial, thought it was such a great idea just to pass it down to us when they're the same people that have cut the rural people OMPF funding by thousands of dollars. But anyway, that's just a comment. A friendly amendment. Now, I look at the departments here, and I'm going to say there's 14 or 50 of them. Can I make a friendly amendment that we ask the treasurer to go back to each department and try to find $5,000? Because that's what it basically works out to. When I see some departments have over $30 million, can we not try to find $5,000, including Mr. Taylor's department? I'll make that as an amendment. I have no seconder, and if it fails, it fails. Thank you.
Is there a seconder for the amendment? Councillor Bruzewitz. So if my understanding is if we... Yes?
Thank you. Follow up. Would Mr. Innes like to comment, or would you like me just to sit down and go away?
I always like to hear what you have to say, Councillor McGugan. If you want us to do that, then the way to phrase it would be that that staff be directed to find the funding for the grant from existing budgets. So it would be an increase to the gross, but no change to the levy, is basically what you're asking us to do.
Councillor Case.
Yes, Mr. Warden, and I know we're trying here really hard to find a solution. And no disrespect to Mayor McGugan, but I find that a bit of a tough situation because we've asked our departments to come and bring their budgets. They've done the cost analysis on it, and now we're saying, I know it's not a lot of money. I think if council's wishes are to fund this, I think that it should be funded through the levy or out of the contingency fund. To take the money out of a department, I know it's not a lot, but I think it kind of is a little bit, I think it's a little tough to just say that across the board. And I understand the spirit of the motion and trying to find the funds. I just, from my standpoint, my opinion would be if council chooses to fund this, that it comes through the regular channels and not such a broad motion to ask each department to do that. Just my 2 cents worth, and I could be wrong, but I just think that might be a better way of doing it. And again, with all due respect to the mover, I know he's trying to be helpful and find the money. Thank you.
Okay, so the motion is there that for the amendment, which would be to ask each department to come up with $5,000. I will call for a recorded vote on the amendment. Everything, they've asked everything be, I hope you got enough sheets there. So if there's no other discussion, I'd ask for a call the vote. Yeah, we're voting on the amendment that each department come up with $5,000. And Councillor Gillis.
No. Councillor Marriott? No. Councillor McCharles? No. Councillor McGugan?
That is one yes vote.
Councillor Napper? No. Councillor Arnold? No. Councillor Bushy? No. Councillor Bradley? Councillor Broad? No. Councillor Bruzewitz? Yes. Councillor Case? No. Councillor Cook? No. Councillor Gilliland? No. Warden Weaver?
No.
Motion fails.
So now the motion's on the floor that, what was the original motion? That it be approved and added to the levy? Okay, so it's a motion by Councillor Bruzewicz, second by Councillor Napper, that we fund this from the levy. Any questions? I'm going to call for another recorded vote. Are we ready to, starting with Councillor Case?
No. Councillor Cook? No. Councillor Gilliland? No. Councillor Gillis? No. Councillor Hand? No. Councillor McDougall? No. Councillor Marriott? No. Councillor McCharles? No. Councillor McGugan? No. Councillor Napper? Yes. Councillor Veen? Oh, sorry. Councillor Arnold? No. Councillor Bushy? Pardon? No. Councillor Bradley? No. Councillor Broad? No. Councillor Bruzewitz? Yes. And Warden Weaver?
No.
Motion fails.
Okay. I think we're moving on to item D, which is Sarnia-Lambton Crime Stoppers. Their grant request, the amount of $13,000 for the reinstatement of the operating funding previous applied by council and discontinued at their request. Do we have a motion regarding Councillor Bradley?
I think consistency has to be everything in this chamber. And I know we had some discussion that you could go back and say this was grandfathered, but I've looked at that and I'm not so sure that's the case to be made. The other thing that disturbed me on this is that the OPP has retreated from supporting this service. And that's an issue for maybe the rest of you that don't have the municipal police force. That is probably the turning point for me on not supporting this. The OPP needs to get that $13,000 could easily be made up by the OPP and the province. So I'm going to move we deny this application.
Is there a seconder for that motion? Councillor Gilliland. Any questions? Discussion? I would call for a recorded vote. Starting with Councillor McGugan.
Just clarification.
This,
they don't get the money, is that correct?
right. No. The vote is to not support the grant. So if you support the motion, you're not supporting the grant. Am I correct? Yep. So a vote, a no vote, they get the money. A yes vote, they don't get the money. Yes. Okay. Should have clarified that sooner.
Councillor Arnold? Yes. Councillor Bushy? Yes. Councillor Bradley? Yes. Councillor Broad? Yes. Councillor Bruzewitz? Yes. Councillor Case? No. Councillor Cook? Yes. Councillor Gilliland? Yes. Councillor Gillis? Yes. Councillor Hand? Yes. Councillor McDougall? Yes. Councillor Marriott? Yes. Councillor McCharles? Yes. Warden Weaver?
Yes.
All right, so that motion carries, so the grant request has been denied.
Item E, this is the request for Sarnia-Lambton Tourism, TSL, funding amount of $35,000 to cover additional operating expenses. Councillor Bradley.
Actually, Mr. Warren, I was going to ask, as a follow-up to the turning down of the Crime Stoppers, the County Council asked the Ontario Provincial Police to reinstate their funding to this particular organization.
Request to the OPP. They like to send a letter requesting that the OPP fund the Crime Stoppers, reinstate their funding.
$13,000 that
reinstate their funding. Second by Councillor Cook. Any questions regarding that? Do we want a recorded vote on that? No? Okay. Any questions regarding that? We're sending a letter to the OPP asking them to reinstate their funding to Crime Stoppers. That was the motion. Question?
Yeah, does the City of Sarnia Police Department fund Crime Stoppers? Oh, that's fair then.
Say funding or support, because in the city there's funding, but there's also support. So
the letter is coming from County Council to fund or support Crime Stoppers through the OPP.
Yes.
And that's been moved and seconded by Councillor Cook. Questions? All in favor of that? Opposed? That is carried. Thank you for that. Anything else on that? We're moving on to item E, which is TSL funding request in the amount of $35,000 to cover additional operating expenses. Councillor Han.
Sorry, I wanted to put forward a motion to support that request. As I think all council is aware, we're in a bit of a flux with TSL at the moment as we pursue a review of potential amalgamation with SLEP. So it's kind of awkward timing. We need to get that resolved so that we can go forward with planning and the rest of the activities for this year and going forward. Thank you.
Okay, seconded. Councillor Case. Yes.
So, Mr. Warden, through you, the one question I did ask when the presentation was made at the last council meeting, and I have just seconded the motion, but I did make a motion to ask, or I did request that they try to find a way to come up with the additional $30,000. I didn't see anything come back to council. I may have missed it. I just, maybe through you, Mr. Warden, to the treasurer, did we ever get anything back from the organization on how they thought they could close that gap? Mr. Innes?
We have spoken with the organization about that. They tell us that they did attempt to find monies within their own budget in order to fund this shortfall before they came and asked for the additional funding here. We've also had some discussions with them with regards to notwithstanding what was said during the presentation about approaching the Bridge Authority and seeing whether or not that is possible to look at amending the terms of the existing lease. None of those things, or that has not happened as of yet. We would continue to work with the organization to try and see if there are ways to mitigate that impact. So potentially, if you are concerned of that, the amendment could read to provide up to $35,000, which means that your intention is to simply support them so that they are not detrimentally impacted by the change, but still encourage them to continue looking for dollars.
Follow-up, Councillor Case?
Yeah, follow if I can, Mr. Warden. Through you, Mr. Warden, back to Mr. Innes. Just a statement. You know what? I am glad they took a look at it. I mean, we do appreciate that. We understand that the organization is in somewhat of flux right now. So I can appreciate that. So at the same time, I will not be asking for an amendment. I appreciate the fact they're looking at it. And just for the record, I think the group has done a very good job. So thank you very much for the information. I appreciate it.
Councillor Bruzewitz, then Councillor.
Before, and I'm saying that again, this is a special interest group in a sense that not every person, it's not like the other foundation that was dealing with the issue touching everybody in the community. This is a special interest group in the sense that the hotel operators, all the restaurants and Blue Water Beach and so on, they are the beneficiaries. They should find a way to self-fund it. I've been asking for that for years and years. Blue Water Bridge, I think they should be stepping in. But just to say that they take a look at it, and that's good. They've been taking a look at it for years and years. So Council Case, is happy that they look at it. I would rather see some action than just looking at it. So I'm not supporting this request for extra money.
Councillor Arnold.
Thank you, Warden Weber. Just through you to our treasurer, I'm just wondering, I understood going through the budget book that they get an annual increase for inflation. So they actually do have more money coming into their budget, as well as the SLEP folks next. So there is some new money coming in there as well. And the other thing I think that we tried a number of years ago with TSL was to do end destination funding for hotel rooms and that kind of stuff. And I travel enough that I've never been to a place yet that didn't have a $20 hit on my hotel room for their local tourism board. So it's something I think that the board themselves need to relook at that again. And because it seems to be every place I go now, it's there. So, and that's something that could be looked at. But we're already giving them an inflationary increase to start with.
Councillor Innes? Mr. Innes? You got demoted, sorry.
That's the second time of the year that I've received that title change. They get slightly less than $8,000 of a bump with regards to the cost of living in 2018 going forward. With regards to your second point, the province has recently brought out legislation which allows municipalities to work with their tourism groups and implement what is usually for shorthand referred to as a hotel tax. I have done some preliminary investigations into that. I have also spoken with the general manager of Tourism Sarnia-Lambton with regards to that aspect of it, and they would like to look into that, and that's one of our things that we will be doing this summer, is to see what is possible and assess what is happening elsewhere across the area. We do have to bring in another organization besides TSL. There is an organization to the north end of the county that is also interested in this, and we have also had some preliminary discussions with them about this. So we are underway of looking at the possibility of implementing this here. There will be a report coming to council sometime. At this point, I'm simply going to say before the end of the year with regards to it. It is on the radar of everybody, and it is something that we want to look at and determine what the economics are and how it would work best here.
I believe Councillor Gillis and Councillor McDougall.
Thank you, Warden Weber, members of County Council. Well, Tourism Sarnia-Lambton isn't a special interest group. Tourism Sarnia-Lambton is funded by this body, and this is one of the, I believe it's the fourth economic engine in in the county. It has provided and has expanded since you created it many years ago. With regard to the fact that they are in the process of trying to amalgamate with the Sarnia-Lambton Economic Partnership, this is a difficult time for them right now, seeking out a long-term lease in a building, I might add, that has been very beneficial to the entire tourism industry of Lambton County, as opposed to when it was in the little house that was sponsored by the Chamber of Commerce. So they have made great strides since the County of Lambton has gone to the full funding mechanism. And this particular shortfall is through no fault of their own. So recognizing that we're looking at this amalgamation, and I'm hoping that we will hear good things, I think that it's important for us to recognize that this is an important part of our economic engine. They need a home, it's highly visible, and they have a shortfall. So I certainly am going to support that $33,000 for that. Sorry, $35,000.
Warden Weber, members of County Council, very briefly to the previous speaker. I too recognize the importance of tourism as a driver of economic growth in our community. There's an awful lot of people that are at work in that industry, and it certainly is a way to positively profile the assets of this area, and I don't think we should understate the importance of that as a reputation game changer for the County of Lambton and our future economy. I also know that while I sat in your chair, Mr. Warden, that I sat on a committee within Tourism Sarnia-Lambton that started looking at the issue of building other revenues, and unfortunately that work was interrupted due to some staffing issues within the organization. I do believe that that is work for the days ahead, but I do know that the higher cost of rent at that new location and the deal that was struck with the Blue Water Bridge Authority at the time, which Councillor Hand spoke to us about when we first talked about this grant request. Some of it is tied up and is very difficult to unwind, but in all of the talks going on, I think it's prudent for us to recognize the value of the location and the value of tourism as a driver for our area, so I'm supporting the request.
Okay. Councillor Bruzewitz.
Thank you, Mr. Warden. I'm sort of stunned to hear that this is a discussion about the importance of tourism industry. This is not. This is a question how we fund it, what's the best way to fund it. And years ago, I've suggested to look at the Frankenmuth model, which is very successful, which is more successful than what we have here. I've witnessed that, and I see it going like that. No touch of property taxpayers. It's working beautifully. We could do the same thing. And a question to Mr. Innes, he says they're looking at possible hotel tax and so on. Why do you have to wait till summer? Why don't we do it now and get it off the property taxpayer who may and not have a property taxpayer benefits from the tourism either, and like the senior that moved here who actually moves to Florida in the winter, he's not benefiting from this. So why don't we just do it, get the action, and get it off the property taxpayer back? Why do we have to wait till the summer?
Mr. Innes.
Thank you, Mr. Warden. There's a couple of things that we need to look at. One is, what should the amount of the tax be? The tax, do you want the tax to be the same as it is being proposed in London, for example, or do you want something that's different here? What activities do you want this to fund? It is not designed to pay for the entire cost of the tourism operation. It is designed to provide funding towards the promotion portion of it. So it's not necessarily to cover off administration, it's to be funding towards programs. So these are the subtle things that we have to work out. The other question is going to be, how is it going to be collected? Because again, although it is the policy would be done at this level, it would involve your area municipalities as the taxing authority who would end up being involved in the collection of it. So there are a lot of mechanics that have to be sorted out in order to make sure that it's done right, make sure that everybody understands exactly what is happening. And again, I would simply say we want to ensure that we're going to have communicated to everybody that we possibly can, so that when the final decision is made, that nobody is caught by surprise. There are concerns among the organization. I have heard from the North End, for example, that the people that rent cottages want to know, does this mean that they have to add it into it, or are they going to be exempt from it? Is it simply the large hotels we're talking about, or if somebody is running an Airbnb, are they going to be expected to be involved with it as well? These are all the decisions and the topics that have to be analyzed, the pros and the cons worked out, and a report brought back, first of all, from the TSL, I believe, who should be the one who is promoting this, and then come back to this body here in order to get the endorsement, and then bring it down to the area municipalities for the implementation behind it. So the concept is very easy. It's very simple to articulate. The implementation of it is where we get caught into the details, and we want to make sure that we don't create a bureaucratic nightmare for people to deal with. We want something that's going to enhance tourism, not create red tape for it.
Councillor Cook.
Thank you, Warden. Through to our treasurer. So if we were to fund this $35,000 this year, will that become their base funding, including the base funding for next year? Or potentially because we have offset in revenues coming in?
It's going to be the question, how many years is this for?
The $35,000 is being asked for under the provision of their funding agreement, which states that they have the right to ask for additional funds in each budget year. The base funding would remain the way that it is. We currently have both of the funding arrangements for both TSL and SLEP are up for consideration and renewal at this time. We have not acted upon the one for TSL because at the time it came forward for consideration, it was the same time that the decision was made to explore the possibility of working or forming closer ties with SLEP. So the short answer is no. This is funding for 2018. If they wanted it again, they would have to come back in 2019 because they are coming to you under the clause that says we want some additional fund in addition to our base, and this is what we're asking for.
Okay. Any other questions regarding this? I'm going to call the question, and it'll be a recorded vote. I would, that's starting with Councillor Bradley.
Councillor Bruzewitz? No. Councillor Case?
Yes.
Councillor Cook?
No.
Councillor Gilliland?
Yes.
Councillor Gillis?
Yes.
Councillor Hand?
Yes.
Councillor McDougall?
Yes.
Councillor Marriott? Councillor McCharles?
No.
Councillor McGugan?
No.
Councillor Napper?
No.
Councillor Arnold?
No.
Councillor Bouchy? Yes. Warden Weaver?
Yes. The motion is carried.
The motion carries.
We're on to item F. Seeing no other motions, this is the Sarnia-Lambton Economic Partnership request for funding in $300,000 to fill vacancy position, move forward in projects and goals. Councillor Gillis.
Thank you, Warden, members of County Council. I would like to move that we grant the $300,000 to the Sarnia-Lambton Economic Partnership, particularly when the director came forward to us and outlined where he saw that this money would be spent. It will be spent to increase the visibility and the discussions of the need of the rural community. And he was noting that these particular positions that he wanted to reinstate were cut, and they need to be reinstated in order for the rural community of Sarnia-Lambton Economic Partnership to have a full voice. So to me, that's an important aspect to reinstate. So I would ask a seconder, and hopefully it'll be
seconder
approved.
for that. Councillor McDougall. Questions regarding this? Councillor Broad.
Thanks, Warden Weaver. I would ask that we have an amendment to it so that it's a 2-year funding project. They've said what they're going to do there. I guess my concern is to get 2 new staff and then they don't do what they say, then the funding's still there for them. So let's give them 2 years. That gives them lots of time. They're supposed to be coming out to the rural municipalities, I understand, and the other municipalities they haven't been in touch with. Give them the 2 years. If they haven't did it in the 2 years, then we don't have to worry about it.
Okay, there's an amendment that this funding be for 2 years, and that's been seconded by Councillor Bruzewitz. Councillor Gillis.
Just a question. We're still having talks with the Sarnia-Lambton Economic Partnership and Tourism Sarnia-Lambton. We're not really sure exactly how that's going to play out. So I'm a little reluctant to put $300,000 for 2 years because there may be something, the dynamic may change. So I'd rather just give it for the 1 year until that memorandum of understanding that's in place right now has a chance to really grow, and perhaps we could be looking at a completely different organization next year, or the new council will be.
Hands all over the place. Councillor Bradley. Then we come.
I want to bring a bit of a reality check to this, that when the motion was brought forward by Councillor Case on the issue of tourism Sarnia-Lambton, it was very clear it wasn't a cost-saving exercise. So anyone that thinks here that there's going to be money saved, and personally, so far I've seen no benefit to the economic partnership to having tourism as part of it. That's why we rejected it 4 or 5 years ago. And if I go back to some of the other comments made, it's about time tourism started paying for itself. I didn't mind supporting this in the short term, but this debate is perpetual on tourism Sarnia-Lambton. Economic partnership, I will say very clearly that I think the presentation here was somewhat way down into too much detail on some of the issues internally, some of the issues that are ongoing issues which are going to be resolved, but they're not issues that were created by past management. They're just things that unfolded with people that and in their own situations at economic partnership. But I don't want anyone to think that there's going to be some magic merger that is going to strengthen economic partnership. My biggest concern with the TSL part coming over to economic partnership, you have a new person leading it, and I don't want to see their time used up on governance. And that's been part of the problem in the past, that the general manager has been much more engaged in the day-to-day operations of the office and those things without doing their primary task. And in this case of George Millay, he did do both, and he did them well. But I don't think anyone should sit here and think that there's going to be some great announcement about the merger of these two organizations. One, there won't be any cost savings, and the case can be made with TSL if it becomes part of the county. There's going to be cost impacts that are much higher on the operation if they become county employees. So I don't want anyone to think here this is some sort of, we're on the road to Damascus, and when we get there it's going to be good for both organizations. There are some serious issues here, and I don't want to see economic partnership spend all its time in the next couple of years trying to straighten around some of the issues that exist with tourism Sarnia-Lambton.
Councillor Napper and Councillor McDougall.
Well, thank you very much. I see up there you want $300,000. That includes new employees. I think it was 2 or was it 3? 2? 3 new employees. Well, they're not on board yet, and here it is March already. Time you get those people on, can that be prorated back? Cut that back to $150,000 this year, because that's all you'll be using if you don't get the boys there working, and then up it next year.
Councillor McDougall and Councillor Gillis. Then I'm over here to Councillor Case.
Warden Weber, members of County Council, and serving currently on the board and having been there for the past 2 years, I recognize that the need for 2 additional staff to come on board. I believe that over the last number of years we've done lots of talking about the need for Sarnia-Lambton Economic Partnership to reach into the rural areas and dig deeper for economic needs of all of the Federation partners, and I believe that the plans presented by the new CEO addressed that need. Beyond that, for all of us, there's 6 of us sitting actually on the board of the Economic Partnership currently. There has also been hard work being done on a new strategic plan, and as you all know, that when you get a new strategic plan, there's going to be all sorts of new goals and objectives to fulfill. If you just hire the people and you don't give any money for the programming, we're going to be right back to square one. And to the point of hiring people, if you don't have the sustainable funding, what's the opportunity of securing good people in the organization? And I also support what Councillor Bradley has said about the road to Damascus, or however any of us want to talk about that. I believe both these organizations, Tourism Sarnia-Lambton and the Economic Partnership, are fulfilling goals and objectives of our people, that we expand our economy. If we don't put resources to them, and adequate resources, we're not going to achieve that goal. What is anything going to mean if we don't grow our economy? And there are people working hard at doing that, diversifying economies, reaching into the rural areas, finding the dynamic opportunities between rural and urban. And you know what? For the first time, I feel a real level of confidence in the opportunities that are ahead for every single member of the Federation now. So enthusiastically, I have embraced the change. I've worked hard with my peers from this council to support the change of the organizations. Yes, there are still discussions towards the memorandum of understanding to happen, but we still want these organizations adequately resourced to work in their separate directions and achieve the job and economy growth that we're after. Thank you.
Councillor Gillis and then Councillor Case.
Thank you, Warden Weber. I don't think there's anything that I can add to the eloquent words of Councillor McDougall other than to say that there was a conversion on the road to Damascus. And I think when we're looking at TSL and Sarnia-Lambton Economic Partnership having a memorandum of understanding and therefore debate, I'm expecting that we too will have a conversion.
Councillor Case.
Yeah, Mr. Ward, real quick. So the amendment is suggested for 2 years. 2 years funding is what the motion was. Am I correct, Mr. Clerk?
The amendment was that. What was the original motion?
Was to support the whole funding, I believe, the original motion. So the amendment is to 2 years. I support the 2 years. I'll tell you, I don't support one, and I'll tell you why. One is not nearly enough time. And we got a brand new CAO. We got to give him an opportunity to do his job, and I will support 2 years. That's it. Thank you, Mr. Warden.
Okay. Councillor Broad.
Just for clarification, what I got in front of me from SLEP, it's a business plan for 4 years. Is that correct? So they would want the $300,000 each year for 4 years. Is that?
I believe that's.
Okay, that's why I put the 2 year in there, is because I thought it was a 4 year plan. I don't know where Emery got her 1 year, but I took it as a 4 year plan, and that we would fund it for 2 years and see what happens.
Okay. Okay, the funding that the original motion was for the 4 year, the plan that they have at $300,000. The amendment is to reduce that funding for only 2 years. Any other comments? Councillor Bradley.
Well, I mean, I can live with the amendment, but I think we're getting so far away from what SLEP was supposed to be. It was supposed to be an organization that did not have a lot of political involvement. The board is too large. The Vatican's got a smaller group that gets together to make decisions. And that's not any disrespect to the people there, but it doesn't help us function. We had a small board that had specific skills there. And I hope we can get back to that, and I think there's willingness to do that. But I think the one thing that we cannot overlook in the next 2 years is the reason we set up with Tourism Sarnia-Lambton and with the Economic Partnership was 4 year funding for the term of the council was to avoid exactly what is happening here today. And I respect where we're going on this, and I know where the vote's going. I will support it, but I will say to you, once we're through this, we need to get back to stable funding so the people in power to do their jobs, to be held accountable, can do those jobs without the annual interference in the sense of we'll hold you accountable at the end of the term for what you've done. And we're losing that through all this debate. And whatever happens with Tourism Sarnia-Lambton, I hope, because that's only a 1 year funding, that we can look at them in that particular context too.
Okay. Councillor Arnold.
Maybe everybody else knows the answer to this question, but what do we fund them now? What's the level? And I think it's around $1 million. So this is a 30% increase for 2 staff positions that were already budgeted for in the past. 1.1 million. So another 300,000. So, okay.
Okay.
To me, I don't know how you ever add 2 new positions for 2 years or even 4 years, because that becomes part of your base, in my humble opinion. So I think we either fund them or we don't.
Okay. So we're voting on the amendment, which is for a 2 year funding block of the 300,000. Following that, whether that passes or whether that, if that 2 year doesn't pass, we'll vote on the original motion, which is for 4 years.
Mr. Warden, the original motion was for 1 year.
And I misspoke. I was speaking to the 2 year of Councillor Broad, and I misspoke.
The original ask was for a 4 year funding. Councillor Broad's amendment is to move it to a 2 year funding. So if you vote yes for this, it's a 2 year funding, and then we would vote on the original motion. If you vote no to this, we go back to the original motion, which is 4 year funding. I would ask you call the vote, starting with Councillor McGugan.
Councillor Napper?
This is to move it to 2 years.
Councillor Arnold? No. Councillor Boucher? Yes. Councillor Bradley? Councillor Broad? Yes. Councillor Bruzewitz? Yes. Councillor Case? Yes. Councillor Cook? Yes. Councillor Gilliland? No. Councillor Gillis? No. Councillor Hand? No. Councillor McDougall? No. Councillor Marriott? No. Councillor McCharles? Yes. And Warden Weaver?
No. That has been defeated. So the original motion stands, which is the 300,000 additional funding for a 4-year. If we have a vote on that. Any other comments before we have the vote? This is the support the recommendation for 300,000 for 4 years. Councillor Bradley?
I'm a member of the board and the past chair and believe in the 4-year direction. I think there needs to be some direct reporting back on the new issues that have been raised here today so that there's true accountability and it's not viewed that there's just a 4-year run without any accountability on this spending, and particularly from the communities that a number of people have outlined that have concerns and want those concerns addressed at least in the next 2 years. So I don't know how we work that into the motion. I know the new manager is here, but I do think that that needs to be understood, that we are going to have accountability so that this fairly significant increase is kept with a direct reporting back to us on how that money is spent.
Okay. That would be done through the budget process each year, or is it approved once it's approved? Councillor Innes? Why did I do that? I keep demoting you.
Mr. Warden. I was simply going to say that you could currently have SLEP come and do an annual presentation in which they are supposed to indicate how they've spent the budget for the previous year, what their intentions are for the ongoing year. In other words, to come and tell you how they've spent the money that you've given them and how they intend to spend the money going forward. You also are receiving the minutes from them on a regular basis at this point in time as well. You did with the County of Lambton Community Development Corporation at one point indicate that you wanted to hear from them on a more frequent basis. So you do have the opportunity to ask for them to come at any given time and make a presentation. So I think that there is a base level of accountability that you've built into the funding right now. Every organization that is funded needs to come and report on that. But there is also no reason why you could not have them come and speak, semi-annually or whatever you think is more appropriate.
Not even lunchtime yet. Councillor Case.
Yeah, really quick. I know in my discussions with our CAO and listening to some of the comments he made here, I think there's a real, he wants to make a move in that direction for more communications with the local municipalities, and I respect that. So I think that that's part of his plan from what I've seen, as well as the measures that we already have here at County Council. Thank you.
Any other questions or comments before I call the question? I would call for a recorded vote, and starting with Councillor Case.
Yes. Councillor Cook? No. Councillor Gilliland? Yes. Councillor Gillis?
Yes.
Councillor Hand?
Yes.
Councillor McDougall?
Yes.
Councillor Marriott? Yes. Councillor McCharles? Yes. Councillor McGugan? Yes. Councillor Napper? Yes. Councillor Arnold? No. Councillor Boucher? Yes. Councillor Bradley? Yes. Councillor Broad? No. Councillor Bruzewitz? Not here. Warden Weaver?
Yes.
The motion carries.
Okay. So we're through the grant requests. We have two staff reports that are referred to budget. There's a recommendation there for the first one. It's for a multi-use convention center, and it's a recommendation that a project steering committee, council investigate cost of engaging for a center in Sarnia and Point Edward area. Cost would range from $0 to $50,000. So you're moving that as long as it doesn't cost anything to have a study, we would do a study. Is there a seconder for that? Councillor Arnold. Seconded that? Any questions, comments? Councillor Arnold.
Just a couple of quick comments. When this was brought to us in October, I'd made some comments there that there's a lot of community centers in the community that are missing. I would have assumed we would have had an update, and I could be very wrong because I don't live in Grand Bend, but the Oakwood Resort I don't think is in Lambton County, and yet it's on here as if it is. So I think we got some issues with whoever prepared the report. They need to make sure they're doing it right.
Okay. So the motion is on the table to with the recommendation on the condition that it doesn't cost any dollars. Councillor Case.
Well, I've put my 2 cents, Mr. Warden, in many times, and Mr. Cook just lent me 2 more. How do you do it without spending any money? Staff time, there's a value and a price tag to it. I mean, I appreciate the mover and the seconder by putting that as part of it, but the way I see it, I mean, we're going to be spending money on this. Correct me if I'm wrong, please.
Mr. Innes.
Yes, Councillor Case, there would be staff time that's involved in this. Specifically, the recommendation was to hire an outside consultant and to basically support a steering committee. The steering committee can be done using the existing resources of the county. It would be the cost associated with getting an external consultant that accounts for the $0 to the $50,000 that is here. So if I understand Councillor Arnold's motion correctly, he supports the idea of forming the steering committee and then seeking to obtain the services of a consultant, provided we can get the grant from the Ministry of Tourism and Culture and Sports to fund that.
Thank you.
Okay. Any other discussion? Does council want a recorded vote on this one as well? Seeing no requests, all in favor of this? Oh. Oh. That was for the that was through the, okay. That was through the grant process. If you want to do it recorded, let's, we're on a roll, so we'll do a recorded vote on this. Starting with Councillor Napper. That's, I believe that's the just of the motion.
Councillor Boucher. Yes. Councillor Bradley. Councillor Broad. Yes. Councillor Bruzewitz. Yes. Councillor Case. Yes. Councillor Cook. Yes. Councillor Gilliland. Yes. Councillor Gillis. Yes. Councillor Hand. Yes. Councillor McDougall. Yes. Councillor Marriott. Yes. Councillor McCharles. No. Councillor McGugan. Yes. And Warden Weber.
No.
The motion carries.
Okay. Thank you. We have one more, is the Hub and Home for Good programs. And there's a recommendation that County Council approve the provision of $75,000 one-time funding to the Hub from the National Benefit Social Assistance Restructuring Savings Reserve. And that should the PM Kitty endorse the above recommendation, the resolution be referred to this budget. So that was the recommendation. And I believe the PM committee moved this forward to here. So, Councillor McDougall.
Gordon Weber, members of County Council, I'm pleased to move the recommendation. I'd like to speak to it if there's a seconder.
Seconded by Councillor Gillis.
Yes. Can I go ahead?
Okay.
Yeah. Thank you very much. I have appreciated the efforts in our community and certainly the efforts of the Social Services Division to provide some leadership to a very large group of community partners to get some solutions on the ground for youth in a rather broad range group, young adults really, getting going in our community and in society. We've got some great ancillary programs through the County of Lambton. Circles comes to mind, and many others that, and I know as I'm employed in the not-for-profit sector that there's a lot of hardworking people out there trying to make a difference to people's lives and the quality of that in the community. So this is a one-time funding request from the National Child Benefit and Social Assistance Restructuring Savings Reserve. I think it's good use of reserves money, and I think we should go forward and finish the good work that we started.
Any other questions or comments? Seeing none, I would call for the recorded vote. Starting with Councillor Bruzewicz.
Councillor Case. Yes. Councillor Cook. Yes. Councillor Gilliland. Yes. Councillor Gillis. Yes. Councillor Hand. Yes. Councillor McDougall. Yes. Councillor Marriott. Yes. Councillor McCharles. Yes. Councillor McGugan. Yes. Councillor Napper. Councillor Arnold. Yes, sir. Councillor Boucher. Yes. Councillor Bradley. Yes. Councillor Broad. Yes. Warden Weber.
Yes.
Motion carries.
Okay. Item D is the review of departmental budgets, page by page, starting at tab 4. Yes, you may, Councillor Case.
Sir, could we have an update on where we are?
Yes.
From a
I was going to ask you.
There you go. If we could, that would be good. I'm almost scared to ask, but if we could take a look and see where we are going into this, I would appreciate it. Thank you.
Okay. Can we...
So if I may, Mr. Warden, Mr. Gruchin and Ms. Blackstock have been tracking what the impact of the decisions have been in the minutes program. So I will turn it over to Mr. Gruchin, who will advise you as to what the relative impacts are both on tax rate and in terms of the percents in the budget.
Thank you, John. Through you, Warden. Your current levy requirement is $75,615,249. That's a 3.3% increase on the levy, and the change on your residential tax rate will be 0.654. Through your discussion, you've added $440,000 today to the levy.
Okay. Councillor Marriott.
Thank you, Warden. At this time, I'd like to propose a motion to, that we somehow keep this at the rate of inflation of 1.8%, because it's my time here, it's always been way over inflation, and I think it's time that we somehow bring it into inflation. Everybody else has to do that, so that's my motion.
It's a motion to somehow find a way to reduce this to a 1.8%. Is there a seconder for that? Councillor Arnold. Okay.
This year's budget or going forward in 19? Let's start with 1 year. This year?
Starting with this year's
Okay,
budget.
Well, let's have a vote on it. See what happens.
You which? Okay. Councillor Napper?
So does that mean we'd go back if they want to do that. And we have to find 2%.
How many dollars would we have to cut out of the budget to come up with the 1.8%? $900,000? Okay. We have to
It's
come up with
$895,581 and 45 cents if you want the exact number.
Okay. Councillor Case.
So as much as I'm in favor of doing that, I mean, are we asking staff through the motion to go back and find it, or are we going to go through the book and find it? Because to be honest with you, ask staff to go back and reduce it to that much. We're not having any kind of debate on anything that could be cut out of the budget. So that's just my question. I'm all for getting there, just how we get there. I'd like some clarification, maybe from the mover on how he saw that. Is it for staff to go back and find it, or is it for us to go through the process we normally do and go through the budget to find it? I know the motion states to get there, so I'm just a little bit, I need some clarification, please.
Councillor Marriott, can you?
Thank you, Warden. I would propose to Councillor Case that we that we see some items that we can either cut or reduce here, as well as maybe some reserves. Combination of both.
Councillor Buzowitz.
And this is a similar question to Councillor Case. The only way I can see that working, if we actually do take position, you know, I never believed, I never support global cuts. Every cut has its consequences. And the only way I can support this motion, if the actual evaluation by the county council members is taking place, so perhaps we could have a special meeting, you know, to consider the ideas coming from staff to lower that to, and I will be happy to support the motion, but I am not supporting just a absentees decision making by just supporting the target number without us taking responsibility for those cuts. So I don't know whether I'm clear enough, but at the same time, you know, I want to make sure that I vote for it only if this decision, the cutbacks that are still found, come to the final approval by this governing body of this county.
You have a comment on that, or before I go to Councillor McGugan? Nope. Got to get them. Turn your mic off. Andy? There, okay.
When you've gone through your budget book, there's a tab there that says the reductions that have been made by your general managers and your CAO in presenting the budget to you. They were significant. They were in the neighborhood of $6 million plus in reductions that have been made. The budget that we have presented to you is what we have determined is necessary to continue to maintain services at the level that they have been provided in the past based on the funding resources that we have. If you want us to reduce the amount that we're taking from the tax rate further, then we have got basically two choices at this point in time. Well, three if you want to. One, we can not do some TSA work that we have planned. In other words, not do some capital improvements that have been contemplated in the budget. The second thing that we could do is we could find programs that could be reduced or cut in order to eliminate the costs, because the costs that are before you are the costs of maintaining the services at the level that they currently are at. The third option is to reduce the contributions to reserves. Again, the standing directions that we've always had from you as council is to build the budget based on a specific set contributions to reserves. So that is something that you can deal with that, and we've always taken our direction from you as to what needs to be done. But again, I just want to clarify the fact that if we are going to reduce the amount coming from taxes this year, it is going to impact some aspect of what the county does. Either the money we're putting away into reserves, the amount of capital work that we're doing, or the programs that we undertake and provide to the residents of Lambton County, or a combination of all three above.
Councillor McGugan was next.
Yeah, Mr. Warden, members of the County Council, I commend Councillor Marriott for his suggestion. It's a great one. But if you remember earlier in the morning here, I tried to get 5,000 removed from each group, and I was told that was impossible. I accept that results. So I don't know how we're going to get there, as Mr. Innes said, without cutting something, unless we take more out of reserves, and we can do that, I guess.
Councillor Case.
Yeah, Mr. Warden, just clarification. To get there, I mean, as far as the motion that was made by Mayor Marriott, how many dollars are we talking exactly?
900,000.
Okay, I must have been sleeping when that went on.
Through you, Mr. Warden, my understanding, Mr. Marriott, of your motion, you want a 1.8% increase over last year's levy requirement. Okay, by doing that, that would make the levy requirement 7.4 or $7,412,000. To get there, we'd have to take 1.492836 out of the budget, so $1.5 million. Right.
So this is the one was. Yeah.
Just for clarification, the number is $1,492,836.
That's to get
which
from
we
the
put up on the screen.
That's to go from the 3 point, with the stuff that we put in this morning, 3.03% back to 1.8.
Through you, Mr. Warren, to the council, that will get you a 1.8% increase over last year's levy requirement. So that means you're reducing the initial requirement that we put in the budget this year, plus the additional monies that you put in during this meeting. So that's why the number is at $1.498 million.
Councillor Boucher.
We have to cut about $1,400,000, did I understand that? And this means there'll be a lot of work to be cut and a lot of cut of services that right now we're providing to the community. So count me out on that.
Okay. Councillor Hand.
I'm not in favor, personally, of having individual departments have to go back over their budgets. I take the position that they went into this diligently in reviewing the budgets that they brought forward. And I think it would be a difficult process for them to have to go back and do cuts, but I can appreciate Mayor Marriott's request. But I'm wondering, what's the ability within reserves to even go part way to reduce the amount, even if we can't go all the way? From existing reserves. I'm not saying cutting.
We have the ability to reduce the amount contributing to reserves. Council could take the money out of reserve, whether it's the opportunities and contingency, to come up with that dollar. Councillor Bradley, Councillor Gillis.
Thank you, Warden Weaver, members of County Council. Right now, we are putting in 2% into the the Operations and Contingency Fund. What is that in the actual dollar amounts? 700 and some odd thousand, or is it more than that?
It's 1.4 million. Get the actual numbers.
Through you, Mr. Warren, to Council, the amount of the contribution for 2018 to that contingency reserve is $1,456,230. So that's 2% of last year's levy.
Councillor Arnold.
I just have a question and a concern, and I echo Councillor Marriott and his concerns. But not only are we increasing by 3.03% in this budget, but we also borrowed about almost 4% more money. So actually the budget increase is really over 7%. That's what's new money that's coming, because we're actually going out and borrowing money to do capital projects as well as adding another 3.03. So I understand where Councillor Marriott's coming from. And I thought that when we first started talking about this, we were going to go from 3.03 down to 1.8 to 1.9, whatever that number is. So it would only be less than the 900,000. Even that's an astronomical number to try and find in this budget, and I appreciate that. But I think council needs to understand that piece too, that it's just not the 3.03, because we're going out and borrowing money to do capital work that in years gone past we didn't do. So that's wiggled down through these budgets as well.
Councillor Case, then Councillor Bradley.
Yes, Mr. Warden, through you back to probably the treasurer. I think when you talk about those dollars, that's worked into the budget. The borrowing cost and everything is worked into the budget. So just for clarification, I'll ask that. But at the same time, I have huge concerns with taking this much money out of our budget, out of our reserve fund. You know, it wasn't that many years ago that we had very little money in our reserves, and council said, look, we're going to take a hold of this, and we're going to start to increase the number of dollars we have in a reserve fund. We all know why we have them. We all have them locally as well. So I'm not opposed to taking some out or putting less in this time, but to not put any in, I think is irresponsible. So again, I don't have a problem with getting us down to where Mayor Marriott would like to get us there, but I really have a huge problem because I've been here too many years. I've seen what it was like when we didn't contribute to reserves, and I know we went through some tough times too. And again, this council's had to make a lot of, tough decisions over the year, but I do have a real problem with not contributing something to our reserves and or trying to take a whole lot out of those reserve counts. So I'm open to maybe spending or using some of those dollars, but I'll never be in favor of not contributing to our reserves. I've seen for too many years here in the past, I've seen us not do it, and it creates a problem.
Councillor Gillis and then Councillor Roosevelt.
Thank you, Warden Weaver. So recognizing that we are putting 2% into the Operation and Contingency Fund, and if we only put in 1%, that would still put in approximately $750,000 into that contingency fund, which right now I do believe sits at about $8 million, does it not? Or am I wrong?
Yep, please.
Thank you, Mr. Warren. Through you, Ms. Gillis. The 1% increase is the exact amount is $728,115, and your current contingency reserve balance, as per your budget binder, sits at $9.8 million.
It's even healthier than what we originally thought. So there's already motion on the table. I don't know if I can make a new motion until that one's cleared off, or if I can make an amendment to your motion to reach.
If the mover's agreeable to amend it.
Okay, so I would suggest that we make the increase to the Operation and Contingency Fund at 1%, not 2% this year. That would satisfy both needs.
So is that Councillor Marriott's making that change to that motion, or are we making that an amendment to the motion? I guess I'm looking for procedures. You'll accept that? If the seconder doesn't accept that? Okay, so we're going to vote on the first motion. Is that, what's the procedure here? I guess I'm looking for clarification. It's been moved and seconded that we put the rate at 1.8%, and there has been no There's been discussion about how we're going to get there, but there has been no direction on how to get there. Councillor Marriott.
So, Warden, I would say since the seconder didn't accept that, it goes back to the amendment. I would propose that Councillor Gillis make that an amendment to the motion.
So your motion is going to be amended to read that in order to reduce the tax levy raised, we reduce the amount of the operating contingency fund from 2% to 1% for 2018.
Yes, but I would need a seconder for that amendment.
Is there a seconder for that amendment? Councillor Bruzewitz?
Okay, we got it.
And Councillor Bruzewitz had his hand up earlier to speak to it.
Yes, indeed, Mr. Wonder. I would like to warn county council members against the napkin paper accounting. I hear people confusing the capital budgets with the operating budgets, the money going to that. Keep in mind that capital budgets lead to intergenerational benefit for the roads can last 20, 30, 40 years, or whatever it is. It has more than, so this cannot be possibly mixed up into the operating budget, and the reflection of the cost of these capital things are in the operating budget, the current charges, etc. This amendment, I guess, is doable. It's not all or none. It is bringing us to the acceptable level of the tax increase to the property taxpayers, and I can live with it. So anyway, I'll be supporting the amendment and the main motion if that amendment carries.
So we're going to vote on the amendment. Councillor Bradley and Councillor Arnold.
I was simply going to suggest you call a 5-minute break and we have some focus on this because we've spent a lot of time, a lot of diligence for the last almost 3 hours and 15 minutes, and we've lost it in the last 15 because this is not a good way to set a budget for an organization of this size. And I don't like the levy increase, but I think it needs to be a combination of whatever you want to not put into the reserve, but also there has to be some direction for lowering of some of the other costs. And Mayor McGugan, you had said that you couldn't, I think you misunderstood the $5,000 cut. The reason we were opposed to that going into the general operation was because it was to support an operating budget. It wasn't that that money couldn't be found, and I recognize that you may come back to us and say, and present to us some things that are distasteful. But that is something we should do. I don't think it should be one thing or the other. It should be a combination. But, Mr. Warden, I would suggest we just take a 5-minute break, let some people talk to each other, and then come back and have this focus, because it's not focused right now. It's just robbing the reserve.
I second that.
There's already an amendment and a motion on the floor. We either have to have the motions withdrawn in order to take a break, I believe, and to get both motions to be withdrawn, and we could have lunch and come back after lunch. Not doing that. Councillor Gilliland.
Mr. Warden, I thought I had the floor.
Councillor Gilliland has the mic.
Who's got the floor?
It's been moved and seconded that we table it till 12:05. All in favor of that? 1, 2, 3. Opposed? The motion's lost. The tabling motion's lost. Councillor Gilliland.
Thank you, Mr. Warden. I finally got to the floor. Thank you. I see this point of order here. I see the amendment in direct conflict with the original motion. I don't know how we can separate those two. If somebody can explain that to me, I'd appreciate
it. It becomes, I think the original motion, the way it was crafted, was to get the budget to 1.8% net increase. It became a motion rather than a comment on objective for today's exercise. As a result of that, there was discussion, it was seconded, and then a second motion came into play to get there. And the second motion was, well, let's cut 50% of this year's contribution to the Opportunities and Contingencies Fund. So we do have two motions on the floor. The rules of procedure are simply in place to make sure that when you do execute a vote, you know exactly what you're voting on. So right now, if we have a second motion, which was a motion from Councillor Gillis, seconded by Councillor Bruzewitz, to reduce the contribution to the Opportunities and Contingencies Fund by 50%, it on of its own can stand, which would then, depending on how that happens, still revert back to the original motion of getting the budget back to 1.5% or 1.8%.
Councillor Arnold.
Thank you, Warden Weber. I just want to warn Council that once you take 1% out of the transfer of funds to reserves, it's going into the operating budget. So it'll never come back. You know, once you cross that line, you're down to 1% from now on going into the contingency fund, because if not, you got to find that 1% next year to bounce it back up. So it's something that it's a very slippery slope to be on, and I can remember a decade plus ago, and it was a big fight to get this 3% that goes in. It's actually 3%. There's 2 goes into one reserve and 1% goes into the other reserve. So we actually do 3% a year into reserves, which is the right thing to do, because we were in a really bad shape financially when we started this process. But if we take 1% out of this, it becomes part of the operating budget for next year, unless somebody can find a way to come up with 1% less next year to put it back in.
I'm going to call the question on the, unless there's a comment, Deputy Warden McCharles.
Yes, I'm just going through the total reserves. My understanding is around. We should get a book budget for dummies, but basically, I see we've got $40 million in reserves as of 2018 if this budget was to go ahead. Am I correct on that? Blake?
You get the number here. Please.
Mr. Warren, through you to Mr. McCharles. Based on the budget binder that you have in front of you, the revised balance for the total reserves that we have in place, and this would be reserves and reserve funds, is $34,428,000. So if you're looking at, or $426,000. So you're looking at that particular front page of the reserve. It's the revised balance column that you want to look at.
Thank you. So we have $34.5 million slotted for reserves. I don't see the difficulty of going through the reserve amounts and whether it's taken from one reserve or whether it's taken from others. But you know, to find $1.5 million out of that 34.5 million, it would take it down to 33 million. I think that's still a fair amount of reserve for the county of Lambton.
Okay. Any other comments before I call the question regarding reducing the operations and contingencies by 1%? Contribution to that by 1%. I'm going to call for a recorded vote on that. Councillor Ian. So, start over. This is, yeah.
Councillor Bradley. No. Councillor Broad. Yes. Councillor Bruzewitz. Yes. Councillor Case. Yes. Councillor Cook. Yes. Councillor Gilliland. No. Councillor Gillis. Yes. Councillor Hand. Yes. Councillor McDougall. No. Councillor Marriott. Sure. Councillor McCharles. Yes. Councillor McGugan. No. Councillor Napper. And Warden Weaver.
No. It's a tie vote, defeated.
It's a tie. It is a tie, and as a result, it's defeated.
It's defeated. So we still have the original motion, which was to find a way to come back to a 1.8%. Any other comments on that? Councillor Bradley?
Come back to, if you pass this motion, what does it mean? You have absolutely no guidance. There's no balance on reserves versus spending and cuts and all that. Come back to, I think the onus should be on the mover and seconder to say, this is the general package, 1/3 from reserves, 1/3 from whatever, so that we have something specific to vote on. Because, passing this basically leaves us a limbo.
Basically,
I understand the
budget
intent, and I support it. I think it needs to be lower, but this doesn't do that for us. And I think the mover and sector needs to give us some very specifics on how they want to get to.
Councillor Marriott.
So, since the Councillor Gillis's motion failed, and Councillor McCharles found, looking at all reserves, looks at more reserves than what Councillor Gillis was looking at. I think my original intent, I figured that there was some things that could be cut in the, as far as, for example, the one that I was thinking was the management increase in cultural services. There was a couple $100,000 there, but I realized to move forward from here, we have to decide. I realized that there's got to be some specifics, but that was one. And for now, if we go with the cut of that amount from all reserves equally or whatever, if that would satisfy or answer the question, because I believe $34 million to pick from one, would be a lot different than the original motion we just defeated. Would my seconder agree with that?
Councillor Arnold.
Oh, thank you, Warden Weber. Yeah, to a certain extent, I agree with what Councillor Marriott's talking about, but the other piece is, too, that you have some flexibility to go out, and the grants that we all awarded today, that's $400,000 and some thousand, and we could take that out of the reserves for this year as well, if we really wanted to. So there is some purpose there instead of just a general cut. I would hate to see us start cutting out the amount of money we put into reserves, but how we deal with that money in the reserve is another story. So I would suggest that going forward, answering Councillor Bradley's question, that if this passes, then we can maybe look at the grant funding that we had, and that would take out about anywhere from 1/3 to 1/2 of what Councillor Marriott's looking for, and that motion may not totally pass. There may be some reductions, but it may not come down to 1.8 when we're all said and done here today. So I think that's one place where we could look at for this year. But my biggest concern to take it and forever will be gone, got rid of that 2% going into the Mike's Widows and Orphans Fund that he likes to refer to. So, and I'd hate to see us do that because it has helped us a lot with a lot of special projects that we've done in this county that we did not have funding for. So anyways, just as one suggestion.
Councillor Case.
So, Mr. Warden, the question I've got, those motions around grant were very specific motions. We stated where we were going to take the funding, whether it was going to come out of reserve or it was going to come out of levy. So again, those motions are very specific. I understand anything can change, but I just want to make the point that we were very specific on where those dollars came from during those motions. My situation here is I am all for getting this rate down. I am. I think it would be great if we could get this down to where Mayor Marriott's looking. But I'm having a little bit of a hard time with this process. I mean, we looked at reducing what we put into reserves. We had to vote on it. It failed. So that's done for me at this particular time. I think what we need to do, and I mean, it's going to take some work and a little bit of time. We do have another date set aside for budget as well. I think we need to go back to the way we used to do it, roll up our sleeves, and let's go through the book and see where we are. And then if we're not done and we still feel there needs to be more savings, then maybe we'll be able to be more specific about maybe where some of the other money come. Now, that's just my way of looking at it, and I may not, folks here may not agree with me, but I mean, I've never been a fan of just sort of, let's come to us with a number. We've tried it. I've probably made the motion myself over the years, to be very honest with you. But I think the right thing to do would be to continue on today for as long as we are. We're prepared to, and we do have another date set aside. Not that everybody likes to come back for another day, or we spend the whole day rolling our sleeves up here and getting it done the old-fashioned way. Just my thought and my opinion.
Councillor Broad.
Yeah, I agree 100% with Todd. We spent how many hours this morning going through, and we got $440,000 of new spending, and we've been trying for the last half an hour to pass $213 million. I agree with Todd 100%. I think if Kevin wants, if the mover wants it down to 1.8, to be fair to staff, there needs to be a ratio of what are you looking for in reserves versus operating. Because it's pretty hard for John to take all that back there to get down to 1.8 without a little bit of direction from the mover or from county council. So I agree 100% with Todd. We have another date booked. It is now 12:15. We've been a long time on it, and I think that to be fair to staff and the rest of county council, that we need some direction to take back to staff, and let's meet March 22nd again.
We have lunch here, so we don't have the motion's on the floor. We have till 6 o'clock today. We can order supper in too if you'd like to. If we're going to roll up our sleeves and each of us go through the book page by page to come up with $1.4 million, we can do that. I guess I'm looking for procedures. We have a motion on the floor. If we want to vote on that and see where that goes. If it passes, then we'll come back after lunch and decide where we're going and how we're going to proceed to that. If it doesn't pass, we'll look for another motion. I'll let the mover speak to the motion.
Thank you, Warden Weber. One last comment. So Councillor Case makes a very good point, and to clarify my position, all I want is a commitment by this council that the budget be 1.8, and if you make that commitment at the end of the deliberations, if we make some cuts in operation, great, and if we don't, then it come out of the $35 million in reserves. What's wrong with at the end of deliberations that if we can make some cuts out of there's got to be some places for cuts. There's got to be. In a $200 million budget, there's got to be a room for that many cuts. But if we make the commitment to the taxpayer today that we're going to keep it at the rate of inflation, we somehow get there at the end of the next meeting.
Councillor Bradley.
The way that will work is that if you decide you want to take half from reserves and you want half out of the operating, the only fair way to do that to the county and the county staff and the citizens of the county is then to table this to this meeting on March the 22nd, the table with the request for a report from staff on the general operating budget and what cuts would need to be made to bring about that type of decrease. Because without that, you're going to end up creating cuts arbitrarily that you will regret deeply and probably have to rescind when you feel the impacts. I would prefer to refer to the professional staff for a review, to come back, and I expect there'll be a number of things in there that will be painful for council, but at least you will have a plan to deal with the cuts. And I would hope that that would be the direction. And if you want, I would move that motion that...
It's already a motion on the floor.
A motion to table to the 22nd with that understanding.
Your motion that we table this meeting to continue on the 22nd?
With the clear understanding that half the funds, to bring it down to the number that Mayor Marriott's raised, would come from reserves. The other half would come from recommendations from staff on the general operating budget.
Seconded by...
Yeah, I'll second it, but also point of order. Should we pass this motion because the guidance...
Not really.
Tabling motion.
No, it's a tabling motion, of tabling of this particular
This is the tabling motion.
But that's assuming that that's the intent to look at this number.
We haven't voted on that motion. That'll be the first motion that comes back on the 22nd. If this motion passes to table it, first motion that will come back on the table is the motion from Councillor Marriott to remove it or to move it to 1.8% with a report.
I know it's a tabling motion. I just want to ask for clarification from Mr. Van Horn or Councillor Innes. What else do you need to hear from us? No, I mean, I don't want to send you off and we're putting you in a position which isn't going to make it easy for you to do this, or you don't have enough guidance.
The short answer is your senior management team and your managers have already cut close or in excess of $6 million from the draft budget that we first saw in December. So we have to go back now and take a look at everything and figure out, what are the services that are being provided that could potentially be cut back? What are the implications behind that? Put together the list that is going to be there. There's some of it could be fine-tuning based on experience in the first 2 months of this year. That's will better inform the numbers that we have. We know what the goal is that you're seeking. I just have to caution you that when we presented the budget based on the 2.40, that was based on finding the cuts that we felt that were possible to make and continue to deliver the service. So we will now look at where can we potentially cut services and save some dollars that are there. That's really what we're left with. So as long as Council fully understands the fact that now we're going to go in and start saying, this is a service that is being provided at this level, we could reduce it to this or we could eliminate it, and this is what the savings are going to be, we can do that. Our mandate has always been, and our efforts have always been, maintain the level of service that we've had there before. So now we're changing the focus. Now we're going to go back and we're going to look for reductions in services and whether the savings associated with that. So that's what we will do. If that's what our direction is, we will go back and we will see where we can potentially reduce services and therefore save some costs. Because we're at the point where the only way to cut money out of the budget is to cut what we're doing.
Okay. I'm going to call the question. The motion is to table till the 22nd. And I would ask for a recorded vote. I guess we're doing that this time. So. Councillor McDougall. No. Motion is to table this and we're done meeting today. We'll have lunch if we want to stay, and we'll come back on the 22nd, and the motion will be on the 22nd will be for a 1.8% increase and a staff report.
Councillor McGugan?
I guess, yes.
Councillor Napper? Councillor Arnold?
No.
Councillor Boucher?
Yes.
Councillor Bradley? Yes. Councillor Broad?
Yes.
Councillor Bruzewitz?
Yes.
Councillor Case?
Yes.
Councillor Cook?
No.
Councillor Gilliland?
Yes.
Councillor Gillis?
No.
Councillor Hand?
Yes.
And Warden Weber?
No.
It carries.
Do we have any other business to deal with today? We have some bylaws that we need to pass. Just sit tight for a few minutes. We have some bylaws. Notice of bylaws number 8, number 9, and number 10. I guess they...
The bylaws, was there in the minutes there about new business?
No, I don't believe there's...
Could I bring up one topic? Or not?
I would allow you to.
Well, thank you. I maybe should have brought this up last month, and it may already have been done. I know there's been a lot of work and effort put in by some councillors here, particularly Councillor Arnold and the members of Parliament. Has Lambton County, from the warden's level, communicated or done anything talking to the federal government about the problem down at the Sombra Ferry? I just asked the question. If you've done it, that's great. If you haven't, maybe we can.
I don't know that we have, at the county, dealt with the ferry. No.
Motion that the warden and administration, with consultation with those involved, come up with something that will turn their mind around, and I know you can do that.
Moved and seconded that we send a letter of support for ferry reinstatement. Any other discussions? All in favor of that? That's carried. What do we have? Any notice of motion? Just the one bylaw to go ahead.
Moved by Councillor Gillis and seconded by Councillor Hand, that bylaw number 10 in your package of 2018 as circulated be taken as read first and a second time.
All in favor? Carried.
It is moved by Councillor Hand and seconded by Councillor Gillis that bylaw number 10 of 2018 in your package be taken as read a third time and finally passed.
All in favor? Carried.
And just to clarify, bylaws 8 and 9 in your package will be moved over to the next meeting, March 22nd.
Okay. Motion to adjourn that will meet on the 22nd of March at 9 a.m. Councillor Bradley?
Can I make a suggestion? I mean, unfortunately, I'm probably not going to be here on the 22nd. Can we deal with the vacancy tax rebate at issue at that time, and that solves the timing issue?
That would be a reconsideration of the previous
Yeah, because
motion.
you don't have to do anything. All we do is need to publicize that they can come on the 22nd. I mean, it just seems to me it's more practical.
My reply to that, Councillor Bradley, would be that despite multiple and best efforts to communicate, people felt that we didn't. I don't know whether they would feel that we had given them enough time. I think it would be better to wait till April.
Okay. Motion to adjourn. Councillor McDougall and Boucher and O Canada.